Bienvenidos a News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de i24 News. Yo soy Nicole Michel. A petición de nuestro querido público que nos ve desde Estados Unidos, América Latina, como en Europa y Medio Oriente, a continuación hemos preparado un programa muy especial, los Best of de News 24, las entrevistas y reportajes que más impactos le generó, porque hemos creado en español un periodismo de nivel desde Medio Oriente. La lucha contra el antisemitismo es fundamental. En una entrevista exclusiva para i24 News, el comisionario Fernando Lottenberg de la Organización de Estados Americanos dejó clara la postura de la organización hacia el mundo judío. Nos conseguimos con el prestigioso abogado y constitucionalista brasileño Fernando Lottenberg. Fernando, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros aquí en Tel Aviv en i24 News.
Un gusto y realmente un placer poder estar con vosotros.
Muchísimas gracias. Como sabemos, eres comisionario de la OEA para el monitoreo y el combate contra el antisemitismo, algo muy importante en estos tiempos de poder luchar contra la discriminación y el odio, más allá de lo que significa el combate al antisemitismo, ¿no?, en el judaísmo. Ha sido presidente de la Federación de Comunidades Judías de Brasil. Eres un gran defensor de la democracia y todos los derechos humanos. ¿Cómo hacer todas estas actividades? Y sabemos que viajas por distintas partes del mundo en unos momentos tan difíciles que ha vivido Israel a partir del 7 de octubre, pero algo muy importante también de recalcar. No es tan solo Israel, el mundo judío. Y tú que representas todo lo que tiene que ver con un continente, el continente latinoamericano, con una comunidad hispana que son 600 millones de personas.
Sí, bueno, estar acá después del 7 de octubre por la primera vez ya es una experiencia muy impactante, porque habemos escuchado, habemos leído, visto en la televisión y sigo i24 en las redes, pero cuando te vas a Niroz, cuando te vas al Festival Nova y hablas con la gente que estuvo ahí, es algo muy, muy distinto y que emociona mucho. Y nosotros estábamos viendo en nuestra parte del mundo cómo se incrementó el antisemitismo a partir del 7 de octubre. Hubo una pequeña ola de buena voluntad, de comprensión, pero luego se pasó y vimos la gente hablando las cosas como comparando a los nazis o hablando de genocidio y usando términos que no imaginábamos que sería posible. Así que creo que esta función, como la de los otros colegas que tenemos, demuestra que países, gobiernos, instituciones multilaterales están preocupadas porque el antisemitismo es algo que empieza con los judíos, pero no termina con los judíos. Y es algo que puede ser un instrumento que va al final derrotar tanto la democracia como los derechos humanos.
¿Cuál es el compromiso ahora, Fernando, que tiene la Organización de Estados Americanos, su secretario general, Luis Almagro, que ha sido un gran defensor de los derechos humanos en distintas partes de Latinoamérica y en general de lo que significa la importancia de la lucha contra el odio y la discriminación? ¿Cuál es ahora el enfoque que ha dado la Organización de Estados Americanos con respecto a Israel y al mundo judío?
Bueno, sabes que la Secretaría General de la OEA ya adoptó la definición de antisemitismo de la IRA y es parte de mi mandato expandir esa adopción por otros países. Hoy tenemos en las Américas 7 países que ya la adoptan y en mi mandato 3 se agregaron, que son Colombia, Guatemala y Panamá. Esta es una lucha permanente, tiene la comprensión del secretario general y el incentivo, y él ha publicado ya desde el comienzo, después del 7 de octubre, una condena muy fuerte de que pasó y ahora sobre el ataque de Irán. Así que creo que la posición es muy coherente y clara por parte de la organización.
Exacto. Lo hemos visto, estuvieron aquí los gobernadores de Goiás y de Sao Paulo, que ellos también se adhirieron a esta definición y es importante eso impulsarlo, ¿no? Sabemos que tú, Fernando, eres un impulsor de todo lo que es la educación y los tratados internacionales dentro de la Organización de Estados Americanos. Me gustaría saber ahora cómo lo estás enfocando y algo muy importante. ¿Han trabajado ustedes el tema de los medios de comunicación? Sí. Porque no es tan solo la educación con respecto a los institutos en toda Latinoamérica y los tratados, sino los medios de comunicación.
Claro que sí. Es ahí donde se libra la batalla más importante. Medios de comunicación tradicionales y los nuevos medios que se llaman redes sociales. Es un reto que nosotros estamos enviados especiales de todo el mundo con un subgrupo dentro de nuestro comité para enfrentar esta cuestión. Tenemos en las Américas convenciones importantes, como has mencionado, tratados contra el racismo, contra la discriminación, y incentivamos que más países las adopten y las transformen en leyes internas, porque nosotros vemos la cosa en dos caminos. El primer, de la educación. La gente tiene que saber quién son los judíos, qué pasaron, cuál es su historia, qué pasó en el Holocausto, para que no lo nieguen, para que no lo distorsionen, y hay instrumentos para eso. Brasil, por ejemplo, cuando yo estaba en la Federación de Comunidades Judías, hizo la inclusión en su currículo nacional de la enseñanza del Holocausto. Otros países deben hacerlo también. Y especialmente medios de comunicación y redes sociales, el desafío de la regulamentación es algo que está muy presente. Porque vea, una emisora como I-24 tiene sus reglas, sabes lo que se puede decir, lo que no se puede decir, porque hay leyes que las regulan. Tiene responsabilidad usted como periodista, el editor, el dueño, y en las redes esto no pasa así. Parece que es algo como un territorio libre donde el odio se puede proliferar, donde la discriminación no tiene límites, y estamos muy empeñados en hacer con que esto cambie. Puede ser algo que tiene que ver con autorregulación, que las redes mismas tengan que se poner límites, y el otro, la regulación pública, sea por leyes, sea por decisiones judiciales.
Exactamente. Bueno, el compromiso con los medios y la televisión es un medio que hay que buscar en acercarse y mantenerlo, independientemente que están las redes sociales. Cierto que incluso la Organización de Estados Americanos congrega a todos los países locales, con excepción de Cuba, ¿no? Aparte de eso, España también ha adoptado una legislación contra la lucha contra el antisemitismo. ¿Cómo es esa lucha en una diversa América Latina?
Bueno, sabes que tenemos...
Y mundo hispano.
Sí, tenemos América Latina, tenemos Américas en general, porque Estados Unidos y Canadá también son parte de la OEA. Sí. Y claro, hay que hacer las cosas distintas por cada estado. La OEA no es una organización que está por arriba de los estados. En verdad, los estados son parte de la OEA y tienen representantes generales permanentes que conducen la organización. La secretaría, el comisionado, son instrumentos de su acción. Así que hay que poner, con las convenciones podemos tener algo que sea general, y en cada país buscar legislación específica que pueda atender a la conformación legal local. Por ejemplo, Estados Unidos tiene el tema de la primera enmienda. Claro. Así que es muy difícil poner límites a lo que sea alguna restricción que en otros países como Brasil, Argentina o España sí es posible. Así que estamos luchando para que donde se pueda se sepa que no hay derechos absolutos. Claro. Nosotros estamos muy a favor de la libertad de expresión, y vos conocés por su experiencia en Venezuela cómo este es un bien precioso y por veces raro en nuestra región. Nosotros todos ya sufrimos lo que son dictaduras, lo que son restricciones. Así que no es esto que queremos, pero queremos que la libertad de expresión conviva con otros principios, no con el racismo, no con la discriminación, pero que una cosa se limite a la otra.
Bueno, justamente sacabas el tema de Venezuela, de donde yo soy de origen, además de ser israelí. Hay un antisionismo específico en la izquierda en América Latina. Hay diferentes formas de antisemitismo en América Latina. Hay un fundamentalismo islámico que no concierne al continente, y lo hemos visto reflejado en la penetración de Irán en América Latina, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, que son países que le han dado la apertura. Por supuesto, eso preocupará a la región, preocupa a Estados Unidos, Canadá. ¿Cómo crees tú que se puede, y en un momento en los que Israel tuvo ese ataque tan fuerte y por primera vez desde 1948 en la creación de su Estado, ¿Cuál es la preocupación que tiene la región con respecto a esa penetración de Irán en América Latina?
Sí, es muy seria, la llevamos muy en serio, porque tuvimos, entre otros, los ataques en Amia, en la embajada israelí en Buenos Aires, que después de 30 años la justicia finalmente confirmó lo que todos ya conocíamos, que Irán lo formuló y Hezbollah lo ejecutó. Así que tenemos, el antisemitismo puede ser extrema derecha, de extrema izquierda, del fundamentalismo islámico, es como un triángulo y hay que combatirlos a todos procurando entender de dónde vienen. Por ejemplo, si en Charlottesville viene uno que dice Jews will not replace us en la marcha que hicieron, o después en Pittsburgh porque creen que los judíos ayudan a los refugiados a sustituir la población blanca de los Estados Unidos. Este es algo de derecha. En la izquierda es algo que tiene más que ver con Israel y yo personalmente te digo, Nicole, que tengo un poco de restricción al termo antisionismo. Yo prefiero, como otros colegas, el antisemitismo relacionado con el Estado de Israel, porque el sionismo está ahí. Ya es algo que el objetivo del sionismo era construir un Estado en la tierra ancestral del pueblo judío. Está bien, ya estamos aquí y Israel les dice cómo se reencuentra de la Revolución Francesa. No tiene muy sentido. Pero la cosa que en el Estado de los judíos, en el Estado donde vive casi la mitad de la población judía mundial, se ve la misma ola, los antiguos tropos reciclados que matan a niños, que están en el control, que es todo tipo de teoría de conspiración que antes era aplicado a los judíos y después del Holocausto ya ser antisemita no es algo aceptable, ahora se torna contra el Estado de Israel.
Muy corto ya, los pogroms en noviembre 1938 sucedieron, los ataques el 7 de octubre de 2023. Han pasado ya 85 años. Fernando, ¿cuál es el compromiso ahora para la lucha contra el antisemitismo?
El compromiso es de seguir luchando firmemente contra todo tipo de discriminación, contra el discurso de odio y contra los ataques violentos a los judíos, sea en Israel, sea en fuera de Israel. El antisemitismo, como yo he dicho antes, es algo que se manifiesta contra los judíos, pero tiene como algo la convivencia democrática. Es algo, una teoría de la conspiración que imagina que hay gente que está en el control, que tiene más poder que los otros, que tiene más recursos que los otros y no puede ser así. Tenemos que estar juntos. La mejor manera de defender a las minorías es defender la democracia, es defender a los derechos humanos y para eso estamos.
Fernando, muchísimas gracias por haber estado con nosotros en Night 24 News. Beit el Farasha es un lugar de encuentro gastronómico en la ciudad de Acco, donde judías y musulmanas comparten y la magia de la coexistencia tiene sabores orientales. Hola, shalom, salam aleikum. Nos conseguimos en la ciudad antigua de Acco, ante un edificio de la época de los romanos, en Beit el Farasha, un lugar de encuentro entre musulmanas y judías. Las fotos que se encuentran alrededor son los vecinos de esta casa, de Beit el Farasha. Vamos a conseguirnos con Katie para saber cómo se vive en este lugar. Thank you, gracias. Vamos a pasar, acompáñenme. Cuéntame, ¿por qué has creado Beit Farasha? ¿Cuál es el concepto? ¿Cómo ha sido el inicio de este maravilloso proyecto?
Muchas gracias por venir a conocer Beit el Farasha. Creemos que mucha gente que viene a Acco a pasar unos días y van a hoteles o restaurantes se pierden la oportunidad de poder encontrarse con la gente del lugar. Para que puedan conocernos, abrimos una cocina en Beit el Farasha, que en árabe quiere decir la cocina de la mariposa. Y queremos que la gente que se allegue a esta casa tenga una experiencia conjunta para conocerse, que todos somos iguales, que tan solo hay que conocer mejor uno al otro. Este es el espacio ideal para que eso ocurra.
Ahora entramos a las cocinas de Beit Farasha. Acompáñenme con la directora de este maravilloso lugar, de esta cocina, que se llama Hadija. Acompáñenme.
Nos disponemos a preparar cubineya.
Tenemos aquí varios condimentos. Tenemos aceite de oliva, nana y ají picante y cúrcuma. Hacemos una masa y mezclamos todo. Esta es salsa de granadas y hay que poner muy poquito. El que quiera puede después agregar más.
Yo te a ver.
Hadija nos invita a degustar este plato vegetariano al que rozamos un poco de limón para darle más atrevimiento al paladar.
Hadija, yo quería saber un poco de dónde eres, Beifoad. ¿Naciste aquí en Aco? Ya.
Yo nací en Aco, me llamo Hadija Abdani. Tengo 3 hijos, 2 niñas y un niño. Soy la cocinera profesional de Bet El Farasha.
Hadija, ¿cómo es la vida entre árabes y judíos?
Este lugar lo que nos permite es conocernos y amarnos. Las delicias que cocinamos les salen desde lo más profundo del corazón. Y yo les devuelvo mi amor a todos haciendo recetas únicas del estilo Aco y sentimos que somos una familia.
Y ahora es fija.
Hoy haremos pan de pita, el estilo Aco, que se hace con agua que contiene azafrán. Agua que preparamos ayer por la noche y la usamos para preparar el pan. Para lograr este color, pusimos el azafrán en el agua y mezclamos con la harina. Tenemos yogurt, miel y carne fresca. Tenemos la carne, a la que le agregamos cebolla y perejil. La salsa tiene pimienta y la mezclamos con la carne. Tenemos pimienta roja, pimienta negra y comino. Con toda esta mezcla hacemos un condimento. Abrimos el pan de pita, que como verán tiene color amarillo por el azafrán.
Es ella.
Tomamos un poco de carne y los esparcimos cubriendo todo el pan y luego lo pasamos por el aceite de oliva. Al horno va por unos 10 a 15 minutos y tendrán un plato delicioso.
Anat, ¿qué? Tu familia es de Bulgaria, Abba, tu papá. El papá de Anat es de Bulgaria, o sea, son sefaradí. Español, habla español, ladino, ¿no?
Ladino.
Ay, qué maravilla, qué bonito. ¡Wow! Tiene 82 años su papá. Oh, ¡qué belleza!
¡Qué belleza!
¡Qué belleza!
Pincelamos en aceite de oliva las esfillas para llevarlas al horno.
¿De todo? Bien. Muy bien. 10 minutos.
La cocina es un lugar universal. Conecta culturas y personas, risas, una misma pasión, la buena gastronomía, la energía positiva entre judías y musulmanas en Aco. Anat, la israelí, me confesó.
Me encanta latinos.
¡Latinos!
Queremos tridi. Es una mezcla de hummus, galletas, crispy y yogur al que le agregamos limón y tajina, sal, limón, nana y cúrcuma. Y agregamos un poco de comino.
Y ahora almendras tostadas.
El arte culinario de Aco tiene una importante influencia libanesa, siria y productos agrícolas de las colinas de la región. Quizá la paz en Medio Oriente la podamos lograr a través de la gastronomía, con olores orientales de cúrcuma, nana, azafrán, trabajándola juntas, con las manos, extensiones del corazón.
Y en este lugar tan maravilloso de convivencia entre árabes y judías, nos despedimos en Beit El Farasha con una cocina deliciosa. ¿Y cómo le decimos a todos? ¡Adiós! 24 News estuvo presente en la visita realizada por los gobernadores brasileños de Sao Paulo y Goiás. En la ciudad de Renana, a unos 15 kilómetros de Tel Aviv, se reunieron con la comunidad brasileña en Israel. Veamos el siguiente reportaje. En la ciudad de Renana, a 15 kilómetros de Tel Aviv, en su teatro municipal Yad Levanim, la comunidad brasileña, junto a los anfitriones de la ciudad, el alcalde Chaim Broide y el filántropo brasileño-israelí Moti Sonnenfeld, recibieron a los gobernadores de Sao Paulo, Tarcisio de Freitas, y de Goiás, Ronaldo Callado, quienes han visitado Israel con la organización de Conexión Israel, un viaje de encuentro con la tragedia vivida en tierras hebreas. Cada uno de los importantes presentes nos dieron sus impresiones que conecta Israel y Brasil.
ברעננה יש את הקהילה הכי גדולה של עולים מברזיל, וכאשר אני כראש העיר מקבל כאן שני מושלים שתומכים בישראל, אנחנו עושים את הכל לחבק אותם ולהגיד להם תודה. אנחנו זקוקים לתמיכה הזאת היום כשהאנטישמיות בעולם עולה.
A visita de dois governadores dos dois estados mais pujantes da nossa nação aqui em Israel alivia para nós, como brasileiros, a fala malfadada do presidente da nossa república, que não representou a nação na sua fala.
Eu acho fundamental o apoio desses políticos. Eles vieram aqui de coração, eles vieram aqui mostrando carinho pelo povo de Israel, eles vieram aqui para ver a verdade.
Na verdade, esses dois governadores vieram ver de perto qual é de verdade o estado do povo de Israel, o que ele de verdade faz. Eles vêm trazer um pouco de luz no meio de muita escuridão. Então eles visitaram todos os kibbutzim lá do sul do país, onde lá houve os ataques terroristas do Hamas, desses desumanos. E eu acho que a visita deles para cá pode trazer um pouco de luz para o mundo inteiro. Em primeiro lugar para o Brasil, que tem muitas informações, desinformações, coisas erradas que falam lá em relação ao nosso país, ao nosso povo, o povo de Israel. Então, com essas informações, com essa visita que eles vieram para cá, eles estão vendo o que de fato aconteceu, eles vão conseguir influenciar as pessoas que estão perto deles para entender melhor um pouco do que é o povo de Israel, o exército de Israel, que é o exército mais ético do mundo, e tudo que eles fazem é para nos defender desses terroristas que nos querem atacar.
Nosotros en Israel amamos a Brasil, nosotros sabemos que Brasil también ama a Israel y esas relaciones no pueden desaparecer ahora, que decir, desde la creación del Estado de Israel, con la ayuda de Osvaldo Aranha, tenemos esas relaciones tan cercanas y ellos tienen que seguir y seguir mejorando.
I made this book in Portuguese because I have many followers from Brazil that love Israel. They love the Israeli food, they love the Israeli lifestyle.
El himno de Brasil, compuesto por Francisco Manuel da Silva, el aplauso, la guitarra, el discurso y las emociones. El recuerdo a Naamá Levi, secuestrada, hija de la ciudad de Renana. Los gobernadores y sus palabras de apoyo.
Naquele momento, brasileiro, aí sim homem que tinha postura de estadista, Osvaldo Aranha, presidindo a sessão na ONU, com a visão de homem solidário, humanitário, digno do cargo que ocupava, soube numa votação histórica na ONU reconhecer por 33 votos a 13 a vitória do Estado de Israel e do Estado da Palestina. A construção de um povo que, sem dúvida alguma, soube superar dificuldades. De mais de 10 mil palestinos haviam sido tratados nos hospitais. E eu fico imaginando, porque como médico que sou, nada é mais gratificante na vida do que o gesto de cidadão que foi operado. Às vezes a gente não se lembra dele, mas ele não nos esquece. E ele sempre dirige uma palavra, graças a Deus.
Nós temos que dar suporte para vocês. Nem que seja, às vezes, a simples palavra. Estamos juntos, estamos aqui, não vamos deixar vocês sozinhos. E a gente fica pensando, meu Deus, por que tanta perseguição? Imagine que o povo que foi escravo no Egito, que sofreu com babilônicos, que sofreu na mão dos romanos, que sofreu os horrores do Holocausto, e a gente imagina que nada de ruim vai acontecer depois de uma tragédia tão violenta, de algo tão agressivo. Esse povo é barbaramente atacado no dia 7 de outubro. E por quê? Por que razão? Se enganam quem pensa que aquela turma, aqueles terroristas do Hamas, querem um Estado palestino. Não querem. Está claro que eles querem a destruição de Israel. E esse é só o começo.
Obrigado, gobernadores.
Hasta aquí nuestro programa de hoy. A través del QR nos gustaría saber desde dónde nos ven. Acabamos de lanzar nuestro canal de YouTube. Asegúrate de suscribirte para tener contenido exclusivo desde Israel en español. En nuestros estudios en Tel Aviv de i24 News me despido. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Hasta la próxima.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Bienvenidos a News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de I-24 News. Yo soy Nicole Michel. A petición de nuestro querido público que nos ve desde Estados Unidos, América Latina, como en Europa y Medio Oriente, a continuación hemos preparado un programa muy especial, los Best of the News 24, las entrevistas y reportajes que más impactos le generó, porque hemos creado en español un periodismo de nivel desde Medio Oriente. La visión bengurionista del primer ministro de Israel a través de los ojos del reconocido periodista Enrique Zimmerman. Enrique, acaba de sonar la alarma que cada año nos recuerda en Israel a los 6 millones de judíos que fallecieron.
Así es. Estos 6 millones fueron asesinados solamente por ser judíos. Y el 7 de octubre del año pasado pasó algo similar. El mayor número de judíos de la historia desde el principio del sionismo moderno, 142 años. En un solo día fueron asesinados también, y es estar aquí en este momento, en estos minutos de silencio, frente a la casa de Ben Gurión, el hombre al que le debemos todo, y recordar las víctimas del Holocausto y las víctimas del pequeño Holocausto que ocurrió aquí el día 7 de octubre del 2023. Son muchos sentimientos al mismo tiempo y no es fácil superar todo lo que uno siente dentro en este momento.
¿Me acompañarías a la casa de David Ben Gurión para sentir a través de tu visión cuál sería la visión bengurionista?
Será un honor.
Vamos. Enrique, estamos en el escritorio de David Ben Gurión. Normalmente está cerrado, pero hoy lo han abierto especial para nosotros.
Increíble la energía que se respira aquí. Impresionante.
¿Quieres sentarte?
Es un sueño.
¿Cómo te sientes en la silla de David Ben Gurión? Fuerte.
La verdad que, sabes, Nicole, que yo entrevisté muchos líderes del mundo, ¿sí? Pero mi gran sueño sería haber entrevistado a David Ben Gurión, haberle conocido personalmente. Y este momento de estar aquí sentado en su silla, en este rincón que está cerrado todo el tiempo y que nos lo han abierto especialmente, es una energía extraordinaria, es un poco estar con él. Y estar con un líder, Nicole, que tiene en su mesa, en una habitación tan pequeña donde él escribió la Declaración de Independencia de Israel, tiene las biografías de cientos de soldados que murieron en combate, para recordarse siempre del precio que pagamos por lograr nuestra soberanía. Un líder que tiene algo así es uno de los líderes, quizás el líder más admirable de la historia judía.
En esta energía bengurionista, digamos, los logros y desafíos que tenemos a partir de ahora en Israel, que hemos tenido y los desafíos que necesitamos.
Yo creo que Israel y lo que aquí ocurrió en los últimos 140 años es uno, si no, el mayor logro de la humanidad en el último siglo, sin duda. Es algo que va en contra de todo lo que se podía imaginar. Nadie soñó que algo así sería posible. De hecho, yo creo que cuando él se sentó aquí y escribió la Declaración de la Independencia, a lo mejor ni él estaba seguro que iba a aguantar, que iba a resistir. Fíjate la cara dura de este hombre, de 1,52 m, un pequeño Napoleón, que se sentaba aquí y que con 600.000 judíos que había en esa época, en el 48 aquí, de los cuales la mitad eran supervivientes del Holocausto, exacto, gente herida en sus almas, herida en sus cuerpos, él decide crear un Estado. Y él sabe que el día siguiente va a ser atacado, quizás el mismo día, por varios ejércitos regulares árabes. Y él no tiene soldados, él no tiene armas. O sea, nadie está seguro que este pequeño Estado que él va a declarar va a resistir. Y sin embargo pasaron 76 años, nos aproximamos a los 100, y yo hablaba mucho con Shimon Peres, que era alumno de Ben Gurión, y él me decía, wow, ¿qué diría David si levantara cabeza ahora por un momento y pudiese ver lo que ocurrió?
¿Qué vería en estos momentos? ¿Qué sentiría de ver la Israel de hoy en día y más aún después del 7 de octubre?
Sentiría que probablemente que hay decisiones muy serias que hay que tomar. Ben Gurión declaró la independencia de Israel por primera vez en 2 milenios. Hubo 2 experiencias de soberanía judía en esta tierra, una con el rey David y el rey Salomón, otra con los asmoneos. Ninguna de ellas pasó de 80 años. Yo me imagino que Ben Gurión en este momento diría, me lo imagino, llegó el momento de la segunda independencia. Tenemos que tomar decisiones críticas para el futuro a nivel interno y a nivel regional con el mundo árabe y con los palestinos, y a nivel de lo que queremos ser cuando seamos grandes. Para que la muerte de estos niños, de estos chicos de 18, 20 años, que él tiene aquí sus biografías, no sea en vano. Para que la muerte de aquellos 1.250 personas asesinadas el 7 de octubre en el sur de Israel, en los kibbutzim, que eran el ADN de David Ben Gurión, que esas personas, sus muertes no sean en vano. Para que las muertes de tantos rehenes que están en manos de Hamas en los túneles de Gaza y que debemos intentar liberar con toda la fuerza, estoy seguro que eso es lo que él nos diría, para que realmente nada de lo que está ocurriendo, de las desgracias que ocurrieron en los últimos meses, sean en vano. Y todo esto exige decisiones. Mira, Nicole, exige una decisión interna. Nosotros tenemos tribus, así le llamó el presidente Rivlin, dentro de Israel. Esas tribus tienen que firmar la paz. Los judíos laicos, los judíos ultraortodoxos, los haredim, que son 12% de la población, han crecido mucho desde que el Estado fue creado y van a seguir creciendo. Los judíos ortodoxos religiosos y los árabes israelíes, árabes palestinos israelíes, que hoy son una parte íntegra de la sociedad. Y como él escribió aquí, tienen derechos similares a los de los judíos según la Magna Carta israelí, que es la Declaración de Independencia de la que Ben Gurión, ese documento extraordinario que tiene que ser la base, en mi opinión, de nuestra futura constitución. Israel, con 76 años, tiene que empezar a trabajar en una constitución que sean las reglas del juego de todos nosotros, que permitan buscar el denominador común entre esas 4 tribus, a la que añado una quinta, la diáspora judía. 8 millones de judíos de la diáspora. Estas 5 tribus tienen que determinar qué denominador tenemos en común para las futuras generaciones. Porque somos un pueblo muy pequeño. Hoy por hoy en el mundo hay 2.400 millones de cristianos. Hay casi 2.000 millones de musulmanes y nosotros somos un poco más de 15 millones. Perdimos 1/3 de nuestro pueblo en el Holocausto. 1/3. Es mucho. Esto hay que recuperarlo y hay que pensar qué tenemos en común. Tenemos muchas diferencias, pero tenemos también muchas cosas en común. Y Ben Gurión lo sabía. Y para hacer una constitución hay que hacerlo ahora. De la misma manera, Nicole, somos el único país del mundo que no tiene aún fronteras reconocidas. Llegó el momento de que decidamos cuáles son nuestras fronteras en todos los frentes, no solamente con Egipto o con Jordania, con quien ya firmamos la paz, tenemos también que cerrar nuestras fronteras con los palestinos, manteniendo una mayoría, lo que es la herencia de Ben Gurión, una mayoría judía dentro del país. Para eso hemos venido tú y yo a este país, como 3,5 millones de judíos que lo hicieron, claro, que es uno de los grandes logros. No hay ningún país del mundo que haya absorbido a tal cifra de personas, pero al mismo tiempo el régimen democrático que Ben Gurión insistió en tener. Somos la única democracia de Oriente Medio. Sin embargo, se logró mantener esta democracia a veces a duras penas, porque en un país que está en guerra no es fácil. Y además tenemos un sistema democrático que Ben Gurión implantó, proporcional, que era muy correcto en los primeros años del Estado, porque la idea era dar representación parlamentaria a todos los grupos, que nadie se quede en la calle. Pero hoy en día, eso convirtió el Parlamento en un cristal roto, un cristal roto que cada vez se rompe más y que no hay manera de hacer una coalición, de crear algo que permita gobernar. Hoy el gran logro es que Israel tiene las fuerzas militares más poderosas entre Indonesia y Gibraltar. Así me lo dijo el jefe de la inteligencia saudí. Es un hombre que conoce bien, el príncipe Turki el Faisal. Y le creo, es verdad. Israel es el país más fuerte en un radio de 2.000 kilómetros. Pero no basta con fuerza militar, y esto Ben Gurión lo sabía. Las bases de un Estado con un pueblo que tiene una resiliencia, una resistencia. Lo vemos ahora a raíz del 7 de octubre, que yo no encuentro en ningún país de Occidente. Somos a veces bastante insoportables, porque somos un poco bipolares. Pasamos del estado de euforia al estado de depresión con demasiada facilidad.
Un comienzo como Estado, como nación y como sentimiento judío.
La polémica, la discusión interna es parte de nuestro ADN. Del pueblo judío. Viene del Talmud, viene de tantas cosas más. Somos uno de los pueblos más antiguos, si no el pueblo más antiguo de la tierra. Hace más de 3.000 años, el rey David declaró Jerusalén capital. Dime tú un solo país del mundo cuya capital haya sido determinada hace 3 milenios. No existe. Entonces hay una polémica interna que es parte de nuestra fuerza, no es una debilidad. Es positivo, en mi opinión, siempre que no lo llevamos demasiado lejos. Y eso es algo que por eso creo que tenemos que definir entre nosotros qué es lo que hay en común dentro del pueblo de Israel, y me refiero al pueblo de Israel en el Estado de Israel y en la diáspora. ¿Qué tenemos en común? Y ese común hay que pasarlo a las próximas generaciones.
Enrique, tú estás sentado en la silla de Ben Gurión y yo creo que él jamás hubiese pensado las alianzas después de todos los años que se ha hecho en el mundo árabe musulmán con Arabia Saudita.
Si Ben Gurión levantara cabeza y viera esta paradoja, que significa que los países árabes que atacaron Israel en el 48 son hoy los aliados potenciales de Israel, y en cambio los países con los que Ben Gurión hizo una alianza, Irán, Turquía, son hoy países rivales de Israel, se quedaría muy sorprendido. Es extraordinariamente importante, Nicole, que logremos la paz con Arabia Saudita, porque eso nos puede abrir parte del mundo árabe y del mundo musulmán, sus puertas, y porque puede ser el final de la guerra de 1300 años entre la civilización judía y la civilización islámica, y también porque eso nos puede ayudar a resolver quizás la herida más sangrienta que tenemos, y quizás no inmediatamente, quizás en el futuro solamente, el problema palestino. En un país como Israel, quien no cree en milagros no es realista.
Estamos en el salón de la biblioteca de David Ben Gurión. El olor de los libros, 20.000 libros hay aquí. Su cuarto está al lado, dormía y yo creo que se levantaba y leía. ¿Cuánto medía él?
1,52 m.
Napoleón era también bajito. Simón Bolívar, el libertador de América, era bajito. Estos líderes bajitos en tamaño, pero grandes como personas.
Yo creo que David Ben Gurión es un gigante. Y creo que es un hombre que tuvo una visión que va mucho más allá del tiempo. Tenía sus problemas también, tenía sus defectos también. Era un hombre a veces demasiado obstinado. A veces ponía sus principios a tal altura que perdió ciertas cosas en el camino. Pero es el hombre, para mí, me atrevo a decir, uno de los principales líderes de la historia judía, si no el principal líder. Yo creo, Nicole, que sin Ben Gurión probablemente nadie se hubiese atrevido a declarar el Estado. Porque fíjate tú la situación que él tenía en el 48. Él llegó aquí en 1906, tenía 20 años, y llegó en un barco medio destrozado ruso, consiguió llegar a Israel. Llega con sus amigos del grupo Ezra, que hablaban hebreo entre ellos en Plonsk, en Polonia, que estudiaban cómo sería el futuro Estado judío de Israel. Se enfadaron muchísimo cuando Herzl quiso crear el Estado judío en Uganda. Y les dijeron, no, Eretz Israel es nuestra tierra, es nuestra cuna. Es allí que el rey David declaró la independencia hace casi 3 milenios. Tenemos que volver allí. Y llega aquí y no tienen dónde llevarle. Le llevan a algún lugar, a Petah Tikva, y se convierte en uno de los líderes principales del Yishuv, de lo que era la situación pre-Estado. Pero luego imagínate tú, en mayo del 48, la decisión de escribir la Declaración de Independencia, sabiendo que el día 15, sábado, los británicos se van, y el día 14 hay 2 eventos históricos. Uno, la Declaración de Independencia antes de Shabbat, donde se lee la Magna Carta israelí, escrita esos días, rectificada hasta el último momento, y Ben Gurión lo lee y declara la independencia de Israel. Y en otro lugar, Sir Henry Gurney, que era el último Chief Secretary, secretario del mandato británico, convoca una rueda de prensa y dice, no tenemos a quién entregar los poderes porque los judíos y los árabes están enfrentados, así que vamos a dejar la llave debajo de la alfombrita al lado de la puerta. Otro gran logro de Ben Gurión. Él casi provocó una guerra civil para que hubiese un solo tzahal, un solo ejército, una sola fuerza. Y se enfrentó a la élite del Palmaj, que era de su familia política, y se enfrentó al Etzel, que era de Menachem Begin, de la derecha, y los desmanteló y les disparó y mató judíos que llegaron en un barco con armas en Alta Lena. O sea, él se arriesga a una guerra civil bajo la concepción y el entendimiento que hace falta tener una sola fuerza. Declara elecciones porque dice que la democracia es lo más importante y que hay que ir adelante con un sistema democrático, pase lo que pase. Y además, al igual que el rey David, declara Jerusalén la capital de Israel, aunque según la decisión de partición que Israel aceptó y los árabes rechazaron, Jerusalén era una ciudad internacional. Y él tuvo la visión de declarar ya entonces la ciudad santa de Jerusalén como la capital de Israel. Tú sabes que yo tengo el privilegio de trabajar con el Papa Francisco y cuando él me pregunta cuál es el mayor logro de Israel, yo le digo que en mi opinión es el resucitar del hebreo. Y le dije, es como si usted, Papa Francisco, mañana decidiera que el latín sea el idioma que se hable en las transmisiones de fútbol, en los insultos de las redes sociales, en los parvularios, en las universidades. ¿Se lo imagina? Y me mira y dice, no me lo imagino en absoluto. Pues eso es lo que pasó con el hebreo, que es para mí, a nivel sociológico, el mayor o el logro más sorprendente del pueblo judío en el siglo XX.
¿Y cuál fue el primer tratado de comercio? Porque tú tienes esa historia, Enrique. El primer tratado de comercio que hubo entre Israel y Argentina. Un poco para ver cómo era la época, que hoy en día somos la Startup Nation y es otro...
Argentina era uno de los países más ricos del mundo. Y Evita Perón estaba muy preocupada por el futuro de Israel después del Holocausto y llevó a Yitzhak Navon, el secretario de Ben Gurión, se lo llevó, era diplomático, y se lo llevó a Juan Perón para convencerle a comprar algo al nuevo Estado de Israel. Y Juan Perón le preguntaba, ¿y qué? Y él decía, ¿naranjas? No, hasta que lleguen aquí ya estarán podridas. Y Evita, pero es muy importante que lo compres, que les ayudes, ellos tienen que sobrevivir. Ah, tenemos una fábrica nueva de dentaduras. Y dijo, pues mándame 25.000. Y esta fue la primera compra, según Avon, de Argentina en Israel. Imagínate que hoy en día Israel tiene mucho que proponer a Argentina y al resto del mundo.
Hoy en día tiene que proponer uno de los, yo creo, de la exportación más importante que tiene este país, que es su Startup Nation. Crees en la Startup Regional, o sea, en el desarrollo de la región de Medio Oriente y también del aporte que tiene Israel al mundo para exportar ya no 25.000 dentaduras, sino exportar todo este potencial.
Israel, el motivo por el cual se firmaron los acuerdos de Abraham y por el cual algún día firmaremos la paz con Arabia Saudita, es porque tenemos enemigos comunes, porque tenemos un poderío militar que ellos llegaron a la conclusión que no pueden superar por la vía de la guerra, al menos en las próximas generaciones, y porque somos la Startup Nation y ellos quieren gozar de esa tecnología. Todo esto que vemos aquí, esta Am HaSefer, el pueblo del libro, que sigamos siendo el pueblo del libro, quizás también el pueblo de los chips, porque toda la informática y toda la inteligencia artificial será el nuevo high-tech en el futuro, pero las bases de todo esto están en estos libros, en esta biblioteca que Ben Gurión tenía.
En la biblioteca hay todo un sector de libros en español.
Él quiso aprender español para poder leer el Quijote en versión original.
Increíble.
Cervantes se justifica, pero aprendió griego para leer sobre Aristóteles y Platón. Él hablaba 11 idiomas. 20 capítulos sobre periodismo.
Oye.
Obsequio del Ministerio de Cultura del Salvador.
¿Del Salvador?
Un libro de 1961, Filosofía y Poesía del Lenguaje, publicado en Brasil.
A ver.
A su excelencia David Ben Gurión, primer ministro del Estado de Israel, homenaje, José Francisco, ¿qué dice aquí?
Euco.
Encao.
De Río de Janeiro.
Marzo 61, Brasil. Y le enviaron el... Ah, es este. José Arraiz de Alencar.
Estamos en el cuarto de David Ben Gurión, Enrique, donde seguramente soñaba. Era él, el ser humano, que somos cualquiera de nosotros. Todos soñamos. Y él soñó con un Israel.
Mira esto.
Sí. Esta era la cama.
Este era el colchón de David Ben Gurión.
El colchón de David Ben Gurión. O sea, el padre de este país.
Esto se llama, en Israel, Mitat Sochnut, una cama de la Sochnut, de la agencia judía. Y Ben Gurión, por elección, vivía así. Tenía un armario más o menos de su altura, 1,52 m. Tenía un libro, una Biblia aquí, un Tanaj, y tenía una radio que le conectaba con el mundo.
Pero con tan poco lo que se puede hacer en la vida, Enrique.
Él vivía auténticamente como de una forma espartana. Lo importante para él no eran las condiciones y la opulencia, sino que eran los libros. Yo creo que 2/3 de su casa son libros, 20.000 libros, donde realmente él, hasta su despachito, tú ves, todos son libros, montañas de libros.
Su esposa dormía abajo, Pola. Ella lo dejaba a él porque él estaba concentrado en ese mundo que era él, tan particular.
Él estuvo con Pola 50 años.
Sí.
Es verdad que él tenía su propio mundo también, pero él sin Pola no hubiese podido estar en el mundo material, el mundo en que hace falta tomar decisiones, decidir qué hacen los hijos. Él realmente, Pola era la mujer, la jefa de operaciones.
Un hombre con anécdotas maravillosas. Hay una que tú sabes, que a mí me encanta. La de Kennedy, por favor, cuéntanos.
En 1961, John F. Kennedy ganó las elecciones. Aparentemente en parte gracias al apoyo del voto judío en Estados Unidos. Y Ben Gurion fue a ver a Kennedy junto con Shimon Peres y estaban los tres en el ascensor del hotel Waldorf Astoria en Nueva York. Ahora, imagínate la diferencia de alturas.
¿Cuánto medía Kennedy?
1,85 y Ben Gurion medía 1,52. Nuestro Napoleón, nuestro pequeño gran hombre.
Exacto.
Y le dice Kennedy a Ben Gurion, primer ministro, le quiero agradecer porque gracias al apoyo de la comunidad judía yo gané las elecciones. Dígame qué puedo hacer por ustedes. Y Ben Gurion le mira hacia arriba y le dice, con mucho gusto, sea usted un gran presidente de los Estados Unidos de América.
¿Podemos seguir soñando, Enrique?
Siempre.
Sí. ¿Y los sueños se hacen realidad?
Oh, eso es algo que yo, no todos, pero si dejamos de soñar, renunciamos a ello. Mi madre decía siempre, en paz descanse, el no ya lo tienes.
¿Cómo se llamaba tu mamá?
Cota Benarroz. Y me decía siempre, sigue soñando, sigue poniéndote objetivos, que algunos de ellos los vas a lograr. Yo creo que eso es verdad para el Estado de Israel. Y creo que es verdad para esta generación de soñadores, como el hombre que dormía en esta cama, Ben Gurion, y también como su principal estudiante, que veía en él un mentor, Shimon Peres, que fue un poco su continuación años después.
Hasta aquí nuestra emisión de hoy a través del QR. Nos gustaría saber desde dónde nos ven. Desde nuestros estudios en Tel Aviv de i24 News. Gracias, como siempre, por estar con nosotros. Será hasta la próxima.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות i24 News.
i24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
i24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, i24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on i24 News.
Hello, and thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Several arrests in Spain and Germany linked to the manufacture of drones for Hezbollah. The organisation UN Watch publishes claims that the Lebanese judge in the ICJ case against Israel is biased. And 30 years after the bombing of a Jewish community centre in Buenos Aires, Argentina's president says he will pursue the Iranians behind it. Those are the top stories this hour. First, those senior members of both Hamas and Hezbollah were killed in IDF strikes in southern Lebanon today. This is 4 people were arrested in Europe in a plot linked to the manufacture of Hezbollah drones that have been used to attack Israel. Let's get the latest on all of that now with our correspondent in the north, Zach Anders. And Zach, first of all, tell us a bit more about the targets of today's IDF strikes in southern Lebanon.
Yeah, and we're hearing part of Hezbollah's engineering unit. Hezbollah has not come out and issued what they usually will, which is a photograph and his name, where he's from. That has not happened yet at this point in the afternoon, acknowledging the death. We have seen some images released from the scene. It appears that very rough videos surviving the initial impact of what appears to be an airstrike, and then a second airstrike hits this vehicle. We're still unclear. There's other people in the scene around when it looks like this is happening on a vehicle that's in movement. So still working to put together some of the pieces there. And obviously this is being reported in Lebanese media channels. But again, still trying to understand more about the dynamics that's taking place in southern Lebanon, an area where a lot of civilians have left. And primarily this is just Hezbollah controlling this territory. At least they've set up their own checkpoints and things like that along the roadways.
What about these arrests in Europe then, Zach? What does this tell us about the Iranian-backed group's international reach when it comes to getting hold of those drones that it uses to attack Israel?
It's a remarkable report. This is coming out of Spanish authorities had identified 4 individuals. Right now, we don't have the names, the nationalities, or the ages of these individuals. We also don't know, this entire scheme is predicated on a Lebanese company, a distribution company inside Spain that was working to package somehow these bits of small computer guidance systems, small electric motors. I need to stress that these are consumer-grade parts. So it's not like this is an effort to collect military-grade hardware, put it somehow, smuggle it through other shipments. No, this is rather just collecting things that you can buy yourself. But somewhere along the line, obviously, a red flag is raised, somebody buying all these things together. We really don't know specifically what led to their arrests. 3 of them arrested in Spain, the other arrested in Germany. And again, we don't know the nationalities, but somehow involved in this effort to send some of these parts that Hezbollah is using to build the drones on their end. Now, we should note that a lot of the drones that are built, whole, complete, are being shipped by Iran through this very porous border between Syria and Lebanon. But Hezbollah, on their own part, is taking a tactic out of the Ukraine playbook. They're building these drones themselves, and we've seen some of the videos that they posted themselves online. It's a really high-tech effort, but it proves that you can yourself produce some of these drones with consumer-grade parts, and then the drones that they are building, these small drones, single-engine, are capable of carrying sometimes as much as 1 pound, 2 pounds worth of explosives within the fuselage, and launched all over here in these communities in northern Israel.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Anders there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman-Landa is a former member of the Knesset. She's a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Thank you very much for being with us, Ruth. Good to see you again. So as we heard there, there's still this kind of stalemate in the north, isn't there? We did see this really rapid escalation a few weeks ago. We saw vast swathes of the Galilee going up in flames. Just talk us through where we are now, and also what do you make of this glimpse that we've got into Hezbollah's international production capabilities?
Okay, so first of all, it seems that the policy is to tire or cause fatigue amidst Israelis, particularly amidst the social level, or rather the inhabitants of northern Israel. And this is the system that we can see. It's a very systematic, very specific model that the Iranians use wherever they go. They did this in Lebanon, disintegrated the country from within, causing different groups to fight one another, basically, and against their own government, and then economic disintegration, and finally they come in as they thrive on this chaos and take over basically with their own proxies. They did this not only in Lebanon but also in Syria, they did this in Yemen, they did this in Iraq, they are attempting to do this in Jordan as we speak. They tried to do this in the past in Egypt, but the Egyptians threw them out of that country. And what they are basically doing is the same thing within Israel. First of all, trying to send one group against another. And they have tried to do this, and they're trying to do this either with social media and espionage, etc. And this is exactly their model for emulation in each place, by the way, learned very well from the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. But the Hezbollah is one of the mechanisms by which they go into Europe, for example, having dormant and some active cells throughout the continent, in the United States of America, and throughout the West. This is something that they do. By the way, extreme Islam on the other side, led by Qatar, Turkey, led by Erdogan, and others, they do the same thing, only with extreme Sunni Islam. Dormant cells, they act when they are activated. And that's what the Hezbollah is doing in terms of their commercial building of certain warfare, etc. By the way, one important fact to take into account is that one of the smuggling routes is via Jordan, of drugs and of parts for drones and for weapons in general. And the Jordanians finally came out, and the king said to the Iranians, enough is enough. Why? Because they felt that the Iranians were backing the Hamas to overthrow or to go against the Hashemite kingdom.
They have to walk a very difficult line, don't they,
exactly.
the Jordanians?
Exactly.
But we saw
because of the population being very significantly Palestinian.
A large Palestinian majority there. But because the king of Jordan sought to embrace Syria's President al-Assad, didn't he? He was one of the figures who was really trying to bring him back into the fold. That does appear to have backfired to a certain extent.
Well, of course it would backfire. What happened with Assad is that the entire Arab League sort of disconnected him. He became a persona non grata. And then now there is a trend to bring everybody back. Everybody made peace with Erdogan. Everybody made peace with Qatar, that was completely ostracized. Everybody made peace with Assad. Everybody's coming back because Saudi Arabia is leading a kind of a let's make the region more stable for international investment and for economy. However, of course it would backfire, because what Assad has done and what the Iranians are doing is disintegrating countries from within. They've done that in Syria. Obviously, the plan is to do the same in Jordan, and now for the very first time in the recent months, there's been a public outcry by the king himself against these very attempts.
Yeah, very interesting. Ruth, thank you for now. Ruth Wasserman-Lund there. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been visiting IDF troops in Gaza's southern city of Rafah today for the first time. It comes as Israeli teams negotiate in Cairo for a deal to free the hostages. It's hoped that the mounting military pressure on Hamas, including the suspected elimination of the senior commander Mohammed Deif, will make the group more open to an agreement. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has this report.
As an Israeli delegation is in Cairo on Thursday for talks on a ceasefire and hostage release deal for Gaza, some of Israel's government members are trying to thwart an agreement that would see a pause in the fighting and the gradual release of 120 hostages still held in Gaza. One of them was Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who visited the Flashpoint Temple Mount compound in Jerusalem.
I came here to the most important place for the state of Israel, the people of Israel, to pray for the hostages. May they return home, without a reckless deal, without surrender. I am praying and also working hard for the Prime Minister to have courage not to concede and to go on until victory is achieved, to add military pressure, to stop the fuel, to win.
The political pressure comes as the Saudi newspaper Asharq reports that Israel hosted a secret meeting with American and Palestinian officials last week in an attempt to find, quote, interim solutions to the main issues that are currently blocking the further progress of the negotiations. One of the proposed solutions is for the Palestinian Authority to take over the management and control of the crossing in Rafah, where Prime Minister Netanyahu made a secret visit on Thursday. According to the report, Israel requested that the PA return to control the crossing in practice, but not officially. The Palestinians refused. Regarding the Philadelphia axis, that's the border between Gaza and Egypt, the Americans and Egyptians will reportedly monitor the border corridor as an alternative for the Israeli military presence.
Under pressure and force, suddenly Hamas is flexible. Now they say they will not agree that we stay in Philadelphia corridor and prevent the entry of weapons from Egypt. They will not agree that we prevent terrorists and weapons from entering the northern Gaza Strip. They will not agree that we maximize the number of those released. And I tell you, the more we persist with the pressure, the more they will give up.
Meanwhile, on the ground, IDF forces continue to target Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad infrastructure across the Gaza Strip. The IDF said it eliminated the commander of PIJ's naval forces in Gaza City, as well as dozens other Hamas operatives. And despite ongoing ceasefire talks, the fighting in the field continues.
Well, Ruth Wasserman-Lander is with me in the studio. So we saw the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, in Rafah for the first time. What is this image supposed to convey? Is this symbolic? Is this a sign that Hamas is weak enough to accept a deal? Or what do you read into it?
I'm not sure. I'm not an advocate for trying to explain what the political maneuvers are of the Prime Minister. What I can say is that Hamas is indeed weakened. The IDF has done significant moves forward and maneuvering forward in terms of its military achievements and in terms of putting the Hamas really on its tiptoes, because it closed the lifeline in terms of the crossing over to Egypt, blocked the tunnels that were illegally dug and moved from the Gazan side of Rafah to the Egyptian side of Rafah, and basically blocked any kind of aid to the Hamas operatives, while still giving aid with the international assistance to the people, even though Israeli soldiers are guarding with their bodies and with their weapons that very aid, so that it doesn't fall into the hands of Hamas, but rather go to the people themselves. But there is movement, and perhaps there was a wish to elevate or to leverage that movement and that achievement in terms of the Prime Minister. However, the very significant thing that is now on the table is that there are negotiations for some kind of a deal, and part and parcel of the deal is how that crossing will be managed. And Israel is adamant not to allow that kind of smuggling again, and therefore there's a lot of talk surrounding who would manage that crossing. So perhaps there was also a part of showing that he himself is going to check and see with his own eyes, because this is a significant lifeline for the Hamas.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be key, wouldn't it? Because if Israel loses control of that crossing, Hamas will be able to rearm. We could find ourselves back in the same situation 2 years from now.
Of course. In fact, if Hamas stays and there's no re-education in the Gaza Strip, it will happen anyway. So there are a couple of things that need to be done in order to make a whole and comprehensive change in that place. And not only there, the West Bank and Jordan are exactly of the same potential. There's education and indoctrination for incitement, not only against Israel and the Jews, but the West, which is horrific and can only have disaster born out of it. And second of all, there's no stronghold on the terrorists in Jordan, yes, but in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, no stronghold on the terrorist groups.
But is there a contradiction in that, on one hand, you've got ministers in the government saying Hamas has been almost completely destroyed, 60% have been either killed or injured, according to the defence minister, and on the other hand, Israeli negotiators are having to go to Cairo to try and get some kind of deal from Hamas. I mean, is there a contradiction there or not?
Not quite. There are between 50 and 60% of the senior leadership of the Hamas has been eradicated, but that still leaves 40 to 50% more, including Sinwar himself, who is very adamant now that death is most probably on a very, very high scenario, has been eliminated, the third in command after Sinwar. That is a significant hit because he was the head of the military operations. But Sinwar is still there, there are still operatives, they are still working underground, and they still, the entire tunnel network to get rid of. Again, you leave a little bit, 2, 3, 4 years from now, they'll go back to doing what they did.
All right, Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, with just days to go before Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the US Congress, Israel's parliament has passed a law opposing Palestinian statehood. France has already criticised the move. With more, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
Israel's parliament voted to affirm its rejection of Palestinian statehood. 68 out of the Knesset's 120 members approved the motion, including MKs from Benny Gantz's National Unity Party. It was submitted by the opposition New Hope Party, arguing that a Palestinian state would represent a threat to Israel and perpetuate the nearly century-old conflict.
We've come to this difficult situation partly due to our own fault. I'm talking about the Oslo Agreement, the concept known as the two-state solution, which we all know is not a solution. It's just another step toward the destruction of Israel.
9 representatives from Arab parties voted against the resolution.
At the end of the day, you think that there is no solution. But even today, if you oppose a Palestinian state, you know that there will come a day when a Palestinian state will exist next to Israel.
As is often the case in Israel's parliament, MKs at times became heated during the debates.
I call upon all the states that did not recognize two people of those fascist, crazy governments.
The scale of the vote shows broad consensus among Israeli political parties, putting them at odds with the support for a two-state solution favoured by most of Israel's Western allies.
Ruth Wasserman-Landers with me in the studio. And Ruth, this is a vote that will put most of Israel's allies, on edge. They all insist that there must be a Palestinian state. Why do you think that this vote went through today?
I would very simply say, particularly to France, that has said very negative things about this particular vote. How would they like to have a state with Daesh right on its border and accept it because that's the way that they want to live? This is the reality, unfortunately, that we live with in this current state of affairs. If the Hamas is not eliminated and a new system of education is put into the Gaza Strip as well as the West Bank, we basically have an extremist, Islamist-ruled land, a piece of land, a territory that teaches kids and indoctrinates kids from the minute that they are born to kill, murder, rape, carnage, and massacre first Israelis and Jews, and then anybody who is not.
Does this vote mean to never agree to a Palestinian
Well, that's
state?
the thing. The vote, the purpose of the vote was to make it very difficult for a different political outlook to, let's say, create some kind of a solution like it happened in the 90s, where there was an example of systematic change and step by step towards a Palestinian state, starting with the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, granting weapons to the Palestinian Authority, bringing them from Tunisia and other places to the West Bank, and basically creating this kind of what they feel is a war. That was the internal purpose. The external purpose is to understand that at the moment to create or to talk about a Palestinian state with weapons
in the wake
next
of a
to
terrorist
us
attack is
insane.
Ruth, for now, thank you. Now, tomorrow, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, will publish an advisory opinion declaring Israel's control of the West Bank an illegal occupation. The court is considering the consequences of Israeli policies in the Palestinian territories. This is separate from South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ, in which it accuses Israel of carrying out a genocide in Gaza. We're here to talk about all of that and more specifically about the presiding judge in the case. We're joined by Hillel Neuer. He's the executive director at Human Rights Watch. Great to see you.
UN Watch.
Hillel, I'm so sorry. UN Watch.
We're the good ones.
Yes, UN Watch. So first of all, talk me through what we're expecting to hear tomorrow from the ICJ.
Sure. Well, they've been asked to rule on Israel's settlement policies and occupation. So clearly they're going to say it's against international law. Israel should withdraw, which prejudges negotiations that are supposed to happen. The Security Council has called for negotiations since 1967. So this ruling, it's really just an advisory opinion. It's not binding, but it would, in effect, prejudge negotiations between the parties, which is the only way to move forward if we want to ever establish peace.
OK, now let's talk about the case that you've put together against the judge who's presiding in the far more important, I think, genocide case against Israel. This is Judge Nawaf Sawal. We can take a quick listen now to some of the comments he's made in the past about Israel. Take a listen.
Gaza can be described clearly and soundly as the largest prison in the world. Most of them, the majority of them, are the victims of the policy of displacement and expulsion, which coincided with the establishment of the State of Israel. Let's remember, Mr. President, that more than two-thirds of the population of the Gaza Strip, nearly 70% of the population of the Gaza Strip, are refugees who have no clear address in their own land except refugee camps.
Israel, as an occupying power, has constantly and systematically violated its basic duties under international humanitarian law. Such violations have included the annexation of land, the punitive demolition of houses, the transfer of population, collective punishments, political assassinations, and the use of torture.
All right, so Judge Nawaf Salam there, in his own words, some would argue that he is not neutral in this case.
Yes, look, many people knew from the start that he was the former ambassador of Lebanon and had seen various of his posts, some of his speeches. We knew that he wasn't neutral. But our report today went into the archives of the UN. We found that he voted against Israel 210 times, accused Israel of war crimes repeatedly. So 210 times over a 10-year period voted against Israel. Clearly, when it comes to Israel, he is the opposite of objective, the opposite of impartial, and the right and ethical thing to do would be for himself to recuse himself, to step down from any proceeding concerning Israel. But, you know, it's not just that he's anti-Israel, he's anti-human rights. Whenever a resolution came up for the victims of the Iranian regime, he voted with the Ayatollahs. He voted with the Assad regime. He was on the Security Council and voted to block a statement that would have held the Assad regime to account. He voted with the Lukashenko regime of Belarus against the victims, and he posted a tweet celebrating the icon of resistance, Fidel Castro. So this is someone who's anti-Israel, anti-human rights. He's the president of the International Court of Justice.
Right, he's not just one of the many judges.
Right, he's the president. And by the way, this has not been reported yet, so this is sort of a scoop here, which is that we're hearing from The Hague that he is abusing his position to expedite the proceedings against Israel. Anyone who's ever been to a court knows it takes a long time. But the genocide case by South Africa, a spurious, frivolous case, he's been expediting proceedings. Israel asked for a bit of time. They needed some time because of Shabbat and other things. He didn't care. The vice president of the court, very rare, condemned him in a very sharp dissenting opinion just a month or two ago for the way he was proceeding. The same thing with the advisory opinion. A professor who worked at the ICJ said he didn't expect it out for a very long time. So Nawaf Salam, who represented Lebanon, which is dominated by Hezbollah, anti-Israel, anti-human rights, abusing his position as the president of the ICJ to expedite biased proceedings against Israel.
So have you had any response at all from the court with regard to the...
No, the report's just come out now.
Okay.
We hope that the ICJ will answer, and the president. Members of Congress from both sides of the aisle in April called on him to step down or said that they would ask for U.S. sanctions. He hasn't stepped down. If he doesn't do the right thing, then we're going to support sanctions against this individual who's abusing his position.
And you mentioned the other judge who'd complained about him at the court. Do you think there might be other judges who share those views?
I don't know. We only know publicly that she made in a dissenting opinion the fact that he was being unfair in the way that he was expediting proceedings, didn't grant an Israeli request for a delay of a couple of days so they could find a lawyer on a particular proceeding. I don't know if there's other judges who feel the same way.
And when are we expecting the final decision in this case?
Well, the advisory opinion is due tomorrow, and then the South Africa case, that's something that will probably take a long time, but South Africa keeps bringing in new applications for new measures, so it's sort of an ongoing.
In the news,
yeah, that's right. That's
okay,
right.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a word from you. I mean, another example of lawfare, as it's been termed, against Israel.
It's really completely ridiculous. We just have to look at not the UN watch, but rather the Human Rights Watch.
Well, they were yesterday.
That came, yes, exactly, yesterday, and blamed Israel in a very astounding manner. I mean, the level of hypocrisy and the manner in which it's very obvious that a biased group of people are sitting and are looking just at one specific country, the Jewish country it happens to be, that will do no good in their eyes. In other words, there is no level that is enough. And by the way, Nawaf said, the president of the court, he said something very interesting, that there are refugees that have no position in their own country. Why don't they have a position in their own country? Since 2006, there's been a Palestinian government in that land.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Thank you both. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Now, Argentina's President Javier Milei will submit a bill to try in absentia the Iranian suspects behind the bombing of a Jewish community centre in Buenos Aires 30 years ago today. The attack on the Amia centre killed 85 people and wounded more than 300. Earlier this year, Argentina's top court blamed Iran for the attack and said it was carried out by Hezbollah terrorists. And today, Milei participated in a ceremony to honour the victims. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We have proposed a break with what different governments have done concerning the Amia case in the last 30 years. We are promoting a law to extend the trial in absentia to severe crimes, among which is the financing of terrorism. It will make it possible to try the leaders of the Iranian regime involved in the bombing. While they may never be able to serve a sentence, they will not be able to escape the eternal condemnation of a free court proving their guilt to the entire world.
To talk more about that, we're joined now by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Thank you very much for being with us, Jason. So the previous Argentine government was accused, wasn't it, of covering up Iran's role in the Amia bombings. Do you think we are on the verge of seeing some sort of justice for the victims 30 years on?
Well, it's great to be with you, Laura. I think the new government of Javier Milei has made great strides in this matter. He recently blacklisted Hamas as a terrorist organization. I would like to see the Argentinian government blacklist the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, just as the United States has done. It's long overdue. Let's not forget that the IRGC played a role in greenlighting and planning that operation. There was a meeting in August 1993 in Mashhad that was presided over the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic and included Mohsen Rezai, who was Commander-in-Chief of the IRGC at the time. And I think it is warranted from Argentina's perspective.
We've just heard about an Iranian plot to kill former US President Donald Trump. We regularly hear about the attempted murder of Iranian dissidents in both the United States and Europe. What does this tell us, Jason, about how Iran has managed to spread its kind of nefarious activities around the world 30 years after the Amia bombings?
Well, Laura, this is deeply disturbing. I think that this threat stream is nothing new. It's been going on for years. But the problem has been that the United States has been playing defense where we need to be going on offense. The response from the United States and its allies in Europe to a whole host of these attacks has been a strongly worded press statement, warning of consequences, a few symbolic sanctions, and maybe an indictment here or there. But beyond that, there are no policy consequences beyond the law enforcement context to these plots. And that has to change in order to shift the calculus in Tehran. I would recall for your viewers in 1993, when there was an assassination attempt or plot that was thwarted at the last minute by the United States by Iraqi intelligence against then former President George H.W. Bush when he was visiting Kuwait in 1993, then President Clinton fired cruise missiles at Iraqi intelligence headquarters. And so I think that it is just basically a sad state of affairs where our deterrence has been wildly eroded with respect to the Iranian regime, and we're allowing them to undertake all these operations on U.S. soil, European soil, without any response, and that has to change.
Well, let's talk about the Iran's nuclear program, Jason, because we've got some reports that the Biden administration warned Iran privately over its nuclear program just last month. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think once again, this fits into what I was just saying. Our deterrence with respect to the Islamic Republic has been badly eroded. Private warnings are not going to deter Tehran. And I have questions about this report with it suggesting that U.S. officials were relieved or satisfied with the response that they received from the Islamic Republic. Given the history of Tehran's obfuscation over the nuclear file over decades, are we really going to take the Islamic Republic at its word? on these issues. So that is something that I had a question about in this report. And so private warnings are not deterrents. We have to start acting tangibly in order to deter Tehran from making these steps. And they're all occurring in the weapons group of the Organization for Defensive Innovation and Research, which Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was assassinated in November 2020, had previously presided over. And that has been a black box for a long time. And we need to start turning our attention more to that group.
And finally, we're getting a sense of deja vu, I feel, at the moment, Jason. We've got this new president in Iran, President Pezeshkian. He's been described as a moderate, much as President Hassan Rouhani was described as a moderate several years ago. And now the regime says it wants to get back in and pursue nuclear talks with the West. I mean, is this just history repeating itself?
It is history repeating itself. It's also an attempt by the supreme leader to put a smiling face in the presidency, saying all the right things in order to basically try to divide and conquer the Iranian opposition, and also to try to thwart pressure campaigns that may be undertaken by the United States and its allies on the world stage in advance of what Tehran thinks is a probable victory by Donald Trump in the presidential contest. It has been preparing and operating under that assumption for some time. An informal working group, according to the New York Times, in Iran's foreign ministry has been established to plan for that. So this is their operating assumption, and you can see why they're putting someone like Masoud Pezeshkian in this chair. It was not an organic democratic contest, and we need to stop behaving as if this is a Western democratic electoral result. It's not. This is an authoritarian regime, and they do authoritarian things as a result. So that is something I think that the world needs to understand, and this is just another show that the Islamic Republic has put on in the past, and we shouldn't be fooled by the the warm words and the mild rhetoric coming from Tehran. The brutality of the regime remains the same.
Jason, thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Ruth Weissman-Land is with me in the studio, former member of the Knesset and research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. And we are hearing this more moderate tone coming out of Tehran, just as we see its activities of exploding all across the region. Do you think that the Americans are falling for it again?
I cannot imagine that with the best intelligence in the entire universe, the United States of America does not have the information, all the information that they need to understand that this is absolute foolishness. I mean, there is nothing democratic about the Iranian elections. And of course, there's nothing reformist about a gynecologist who said that women do not need to be checked by doctors at one point. There is an actual quote of him saying that that's not a very reformist, moderate thing to say. No. But he is certainly a part and parcel of the Ayatollah regime. In fact, it's not Ayatollah, it's rather Mullah regime. Ayatollah is too high a religious word for the leaders, the extremist leaders of that country. And Iran, in fact, is a very big danger, not only to Israel, but to the entire world. The countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and others well understand that. It's almost impossible to me to fathom that the United States doesn't, yet the way in which it acts vis-a-vis Iran, particularly in the last couple of years, is a little bit worrying.
Are you encouraged by what you heard at the Republican Party convention this week? Strong support for Israel, strong support for the hostages, a prayer for the hostages, but also a lot of talk about the Abraham Accords, which was interesting, and about that America needs to confront Iran more robustly? I
think that the world needs to confront Iran. I don't think it's a matter of Republican or Democratic or this political party, if it's right-wing or left-wing. I think it's a worldwide threat. And the Iranians, it is quite clear, it's very difficult to understand how one cannot understand this, because they say it clearly, the extremist Islamic rhetoric, not only thought and ideology, but rhetoric, whether it's from the Shiite side led by Iran or again from the Qatari and Turkish-led Sunni Muslim Brotherhood side, there is a threat to the world because the ideology calls for a worldwide caliphate of Sharia-led domination that doesn't leave you and myself, Christians, Republicans, Democrats, right-wing, left-wing, Netanyahu and his opposition at all in any place that could well live in some kind of an understanding with them. And that's what they're aiming for, including the West.
All right, Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, Turkey's President Erdogan said this week that he was planning to end military operations in northern Iraq. Ankara sent troops in 2022 in what Erdogan claimed was a crackdown on the Kurdish militant group, the PKK. But Iraq's First Lady, Shanaz Ibrahim Ahmed, has written a long post on social media accusing Turkish troops of committing crimes against Kurdish civilians. To talk about that, we're joined by Entifat Kambar. He's the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Thank you for being with us, Entifat. Great to see you. So what are Turkish troops doing in Iraqi Kurdistan? Are they targeting civilians? And what is the government in Erbil doing about it?
Great to see you, Laura. Unfortunately, the First Lady belongs to the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK, which are very unfortunate in alliance currently with the PKK. And the PKK is a terrorist organization. Like Turkey or hate it, the PKK is a terror organization threatening the stability of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey and the region. And they are also in alliance now, the PKK, with Hezbollah of Lebanon and with Iran. So what she's saying is basically not going to solve the problem, is even going to make it more complicated. I called on your program previously, and I repeat it today, there has to be an international alliance to counter the PKK, and not only the Turkish or the Kurdistan region job. The PKK are killing Kurds more than killing Turks or the Turkish army. And as I said, they has to be eliminated. And they are extension of the Hamas terror, of the Hezbollah terror, and which is all sponsored by Iran.
So would you like the Turkish troops to stay in Iraq?
The problem is the areas where the Turkish troops are entering Iraq are under no one's control. Neither the federal government in Baghdad is capable to control it because it's a very rugged mountainous area, nor the Kurdish government with their limited capabilities able to control it. These are very rugged mountains. That's why the PKK, the Qandil Mountains called, made it a stronghold for them to launch attacks against the Kurds in Iraq and against Turkey. But again, as I said, the PKK now, some of the PKK, believe it or not, are paid by the Iraqi proxy Shia militias. So that shows you where the alliance is. They are also controlling the area of Sinjar and creating mayhem for the Yazidis. So it's not only, this is not only a problem of Turkey, this is a problem beyond the capability of Iraq or the Kurdish government and requires coordination. But Iran is using the PKK as a stick against Turkey, against Iraq's stability, and against the region.
Meanwhile, talking about Iranian-linked militia, another one of those groups carried out a drone attack, quite a serious drone attack on the Al-Ain US military base in Iraq. This has been described as a huge embarrassment for Baghdad. What does this tell us about the activities of these militias after they had appeared to scale back their attacks somewhat?
I would add it would be a huge embarrassment for the Biden administration, which has been calling appeasing Iran, allowing today the Secretary Blinken allowed Iraq to pay for electricity for Iran. So the appeasement, the addiction to the appeasement policy of Iran, that's the result of it. The result of it, Hamas attacked Israel. The result of it, those militias got emboldened. Not to mention that the Iraqi government is paying those militias $3 billion on a declared line item on the Iraqi budget, and not this only for salaries. This is the first time you see it, a government who's supposedly an ally of the United States paying a terror groups, at least 4 of them within the Hashd al-Sha'bi, by the Iraqi budget. and the United States should take strong stand. We are hoping in November there will be a change of administration, change of policy, and the Iraqi government should be held accountable. Sheikh Akram al-Ka'bi, the head of al-Nujaba, yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, Laura, put out a video detonating with his own hands on the video a drone attack against Israel from Iraq. This is not acceptable. And the same guy carries government IDs funded by the government on the payroll of the Iraqi government. And this dual stand of trying to appease Iran, at the same time hoping that Iranians will behave better in Iraq and in the Middle East, by the Biden administration failed and failed miserably. As I say, always October 7 was the test. But unfortunately, the Biden administration, there's no leadership to stop this unfortunate failing policy.
Entifad, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much. Entifad Kanbar there. Now, the United Arab Emirates is sending troops to take part in military drills in South Korea. Emirati troops will operate alongside American and Korean troops on the peninsula for the first time. We can get more on that now with our Dubai correspondent, Bastien Bourri. So, Bastien, why South Korea? Why is the UAE sending troops there?
Well, this is the proof that Abu Dhabi is investing a significant amount in training its military personnel, particularly through American and now Chinese and Korean-based programs ranging from professional military education to more tactical training in collaboration, once again with American and now East Asian facilities. So internally, the Emiratis have begun developing their own education capability through the establishment of a national defense college, for instance. And outside their borders, they are trying to gain experience in operating in various environments, like conducting drills with China, with Korea, as well as real operations involving air, but also ground and sea-based capabilities. Their military campaign in Yemen is a good example, all to the detriment, and of course that's the tragedy, all to the detriment of the Yemeni people, but in favor of greater operational experience for Abu Dhabi.
And the UAE, of course, has just nominated a new defence minister. Is this kind of him trying to make his mark on things?
In a way, yes. This new minister is in charge of asserting the country's defense strategy, which is based on a series of guiding principles. First, countering Iran. Iran represents the greatest security challenge to the UAE, which, with long-standing territorial dispute, doubts about the security of strategic shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz, concerns about Tehran's nuclear and ballistic programs, about Iranian proxies activities as well in neighboring countries like Iraq and Yemen. Then the second priority will be to counter extremism with groups like the Muslim Brotherhoods, Al-Qaeda, and also what's left of the Islamic State. And we saw that yesterday in Oman. All this being seen as threats to the UAE's strategy to preserve and grow its influence within the region. And then the third principle, which is probably the most important one, is to work toward limiting the UAE's dependence on foreign partners, despite Abu Dhabi's close relationship with countries like the United States and South Korea, especially militarily. So this new minister will be focusing on the local defense industry and the capacity of his own military personnel.
Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bourri there in Dubai. Now, Pakistan lodged an official complaint with the Taliban government in Afghanistan over an attack against one of its military compounds in the country's northwest. 8 soldiers were killed and many more injured. The UN and the United States have expressed concern of late about the rise of extremist and terrorist groups inside Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover. We're joining us now. Ahmed Qureshi is a Pakistan-based journalist and TV host. Great to see you, Ahmed. Thank you for joining us. This is thought, isn't it, to be the work of the TTP, otherwise known as the Pakistani Taliban. Can you explain to us a bit about this group, which is believed to be responsible for hundreds of deaths in Pakistan?
Exactly, Laura. Good to see you. So basically, we have the Afghan Taliban. Everybody, the world knows the Afghan Taliban. It started back in the 1990s. The Pakistani Taliban is a fairly newer phenomenon. It began after 9/11 in Pakistan. So these are the Pakistani Taliban. So whereas you have the Afghan Taliban who are in power in Afghanistan, we have this Pakistani Taliban. Now, the Pakistani Taliban basically operated inside Pakistan for years, and they basically attacked Pakistani civilians and Pakistani military and government buildings. Now, after Pakistani anti-terror operations, they escaped into Afghanistan, and now they've pledged allegiance to the Afghan Taliban. And so to speak, they're under protection of the Afghan Taliban de facto government. Obviously, it's an interim government in Afghanistan. And Pakistan is basically asking the Afghan Taliban government, the de facto government, the interim government, to please stop these people or hand them over to Pakistan. Now, the Afghan Taliban says, we can't do this, number one. And number two, if you have a problem with them, they are your citizens, try to deal with them, politically, negotiate, talk. Pakistanis do not want to do that because they're terrorists and they're killing Pakistani soldiers and civilians, so they want to fight them. So it's a very difficult situation between these two countries. And now we've seen over the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in the number of attacks that emanate from inside Afghanistan. And now this attack that happened is a major attack because 10 attackers, all of them were killed eventually, but one of them, actually, Pakistani investigators say they were successful in identifying one of the attackers, and it appears he's based in Afghanistan, and he's an Afghan citizen, as a matter of fact. And so it's a very difficult situation. Now, Pakistan, of course, obviously cannot go beyond what it's doing. It's trying to convince the Afghan Taliban government. There have been some reprisals in terms of the treatment of indirect signaling to the Afghan government that we will not treat your citizens well in Pakistan if you do not take care of our concerns. So there's a lot of tension right now between Kabul and Islamabad. And frankly, there's not much that Pakistan can do right now because, frankly, this is an interim government in Afghanistan. Most of the world does not recognize it, but it's a de facto government. The UN and everybody's dealing with them because, at least they're taking care of security in Afghanistan, so it's not a headache for most of the neighbors of Afghanistan. But Pakistan obviously is not satisfied with that. The United States and other Western partners are supporting Pakistani position, obviously, and are trying to convince the Taliban to do something about the TTP. Let's see where this goes.
Well, the UN and the US, as I said, mentioned this week that they are concerned about the rise of not just Taliban-linked groups, but also ISIS, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, all of these terrorist groups. Would you say that Afghanistan is becoming a major terrorist hub again, just as it was back in the 1990s?
We are not yet there, Laura. We're not there yet. But, these are the early signs because, when back in the 1990s, this is how it began. But it was much faster and much lethal back in the 1990s. Right now, it's, yes, there is a concentration. TTP is violent or is conducting violent attacks across the border. Now, the rest of the terror groups are operating or are based inside Afghanistan. They have not yet carried out attacks across from Afghanistan. So, for example, the Afghan Taliban government in Kabul, you'll be surprised to hear this, has a very good relationship right now with China, has a very good relationship with Iran, and with a number of other Central Asian republics. The only country right now, it seems, and also with India, you'd be surprised, the Afghan Taliban have a very, very good relationship with India as well, although they do not share a border. But Pakistan is one country which, again, shares the largest border. These two countries share the largest border, also share a lot of ethnic intersections, but at the same time, don't have a good relationship. And Pakistan is the only place where a group based in Afghanistan is conducting violent attacks. So we're not yet there, the situation back in the 1990s, but it's emerging and it's growing. And you can rest assured, if you have this UN report, you have the US expressing concern, you have Pakistan expressing concern, you can rest assured this spells trouble. This could, grow bigger into a huge and a bigger problem into the future. But we're not there yet.
Ahmed, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Ahmed Qureshi there. And Ruth Wasserman-Land is with me in the studio. We are at a very dangerous moment globally, aren't we? We just heard Ahmed there describing how, terrorist Islamist groups are very much on the rise in Afghanistan, in that part of the world. Obviously, we've seen what's happening here. We've got a president of the United States who, people are saying is weak and doesn't have a grasp on what's going on at the moment. Just give us a sense of where you see this headed.
It almost sounds like a Hollywood script. But there is quite a systematic mechanism led by certain forces that are perhaps not politically correct, but they are the former USSR, currently led by Russia, China, Iran, and Islamic extremism on the other side, which is Muslim Brotherhood. All of these factors have only one thing in common. They want hegemony and power, which goes, of course, with riches and money, but they want and they thrive on chaos. And chaos means disintegrating countries from within and encouraging different groups from within, as was described in Iraq, which is a very good example, formerly by the Kurdish commentator, about what Iran and other groups, the former USSR, Russia has been doing this for years. China has been doing this in Africa. For example, in Latin America. We need to watch out and have some kind of a policing.
It's a global phenomenon. Ruth, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much.
Global phenomenon, exactly.
Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Martinez-Amir, and you're watching The Rundown on I-24 News live from Tel Aviv. We begin with breaking news. Israeli fighter jets carried out airstrikes in Yemen this evening. In a statement, the IDF confirmed it had struck Houthi regime targets in the port city of Hodeidah, which is used by the rebel group to receive weapons transfers from Iran. The military says the strikes are in response to the hundreds of attacks carried out against Israel in recent months, including Friday morning's deadly drone strike in Tel Aviv. The Houthis claim people were injured and killed in the strikes on the fuel depots and are vowing revenge. The Iranian-backed proxy group says Israel will pay the price of escalation, warning its next target will be the port of Haifa. And joining me in studio this evening, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Relek Shafir, former commander of the Temnof Air Force Base and former Israeli Air Force combat pilot. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, Relek. This airstrike was approved this morning by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and marks the first time that Israel has ever struck Yemen. Walk us through what it takes to carry out such an operation.
Let me start off by saying that the Israeli Air Force had been training for this kind of a mission for many, many years, many decades. It involves fighter aircraft. It involves refueling capability in order to extend the range of the fighter aircraft to ranges of 2,000 kilometers and even beyond that. So having casual training of this kind of a mission allows for a 24-hour response from the attack. It entails fighters, F-15s, F-16s, F-35s, each with its own capabilities and specialties that fly in a formation. I won't go into the technical details. And get to that area usually, as in this case, they fly at a high altitude. So because we're talking about the Houthis, whose defenses are not really effective, then it can be done in what we call a high mode, which means fly at high altitude to the target, bomb from high altitude, and turn back. That is, if you're going somewhere where there's more defenses, you might be going at low level to the target, attack the target at low level, and then come back in high altitude, or maybe even low level if that's required. But that would entail a lot more refueling than if you fly at high level. So the airplanes are actually in formation. Usually the airplanes fly in foursomes, 4 airplanes. There would be a mix from different squadrons. There's not much interaction in the sense that the formations know how to work together, keep their distance, and do the different type of jobs. Some of them might use electronic warfare. Some of them will deliver the bombs, either direct bombing or long-range missiles that are actually fired from the airplane. The airplane can turn back, and the navigator will fly the missile into the target. That is basically, there are a lot of technical details that our professional won't go into at this time.
All right, Relek, stay with me. I want to take a listen to quick statements made by IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant a short while ago.
Who is behind the Houthis? One country, Iran. The Iranian regime funds, arms, and directs the Houthi terror activity. Israel is fighting a multi-front war against Iran's aggression proxies, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. The International Maritime Coalition, led by United States Central Command, as well as the IDF, have stopped many of those Houthis' attacks in recent months. We see common interests for all countries attacked by Iranian-backed Houthi terrorism to stand together against this threat. Today, this was an IDF-only action. I want to repeat it. Today, this was an IDF-only action. We will continue to defend the people of Israel from all threats, near and far.
The fire that is currently burning in Hodeidah is seen across the Middle East, and the significance is clear. The Houthis attacked us over 200 times. The first time that they harmed an Israeli citizen, we struck them, and we will do this in any place where it might be required.
Relic, I want to get your take on some of those statements that we heard there from the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Gali, specifically saying that Israel acted alone here. Tell us why it's so important for Israel to make those statements and saying that they acted alone and not with the assistance of its allies.
It was important in two senses. One of them is, in effect, the Americans and the British who attacked the Houthis up to now concentrated on air defense systems. They didn't hit infrastructure, only military targets. This time, Israel is hitting civilian targets. And so it's important to and this is part of the agreements that we have with the coalition, is not to involve them in actions that might cause a retaliation beyond what we've seen so far as maritime travels are concerned. So that's one thing. Remember that we're also talking about maritime through the Suez Canal, which has been stopped by the Houthis. The second thing is to let both Hezbollah and the Iranians know that Israel can act alone at a large range, a range of targets as well, infrastructure. Iran has some important infrastructure units along the Hormuz Straits and the Bandar Abbas area and such. And so we're using this as, I would say, a warning to all the warring factors and the proxies that this is just the beginning of a strategic strike. So we're also using this as a leverage as well.
Relic, you mentioned those potential consequences, that potential retaliation by the Houthis, who have launched some 220 drone cruise missiles and ballistic missiles at Israel in the past 9 months. Channel 12 is reporting that ministers have been warned to expect a chain of responses. How exactly is Israel preparing for that retaliation?
Well, there's no change because these the Houthis' ballistic missiles are being taken care of by the Americans in the area, who are monitoring them, who are targeting those drones and missiles that they've sent. Those 200 that arrived, many of them were taken down by the Americans. So because the Houthis do not have more than what we've already seen, we can feel pretty safe that we have such an advanced warning. We're talking almost 2,000 kilometers for the missiles and maybe cruise missiles and drones. Those drones take 10 hours to travel. And the one that we didn't take out, we saw it, but since it went through the Sinai, it wasn't considered to be a possible hostile target. But they have a very limited capability. That's why it's easy for us to strike them, because we can expect to be able to contain whatever they want to send us.
All right, on that note, I want to cross over to Berlin, where I'm joined by Fabian Heinz. He's a research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Fabian.
Thanks so much.
I want to get your assessment of this Israeli strike on the port of Hodeidah, which is used by the Houthis to receive weapons transfers from Iran. Will this hurt the Houthis' capabilities and, in turn, Iran's operations in the region?
I would say if you look at the Houthis, you're looking at an actor that's very, very difficult to deter. They've endured years of a Saudi-led and Emirati-led bombing campaign. For them, this is normalcy. They're a party that is used to war, that has emerged from war. So for them, even major damage to civilian critical infrastructure will probably not deter them from attacks. Now, how will this affect Iranian resupplies? So there have been reports that Iranian supplies went directly to Hodeidah. So if you have some sort of attack there, that might impede the transfers. But a lot of these capabilities can also be disassembled into smaller parts. Iran has established local production for some of the missiles and drones being used, potentially also for the Samad 3 that we saw being used against Tel Aviv. So you only have to smuggle small components. So it is a strong symbol, but it will probably not stop the Houthis from acquiring these capabilities.
Should Israel be wary of the Houthi threats given Friday's unfortunately successful drone strike in Tel Aviv?
So I agree with what has already been said here. So the Houthis have the problem of geography. Hitting a target over that distance is difficult. It requires large systems that can be easily detected, that have a long flight time. It requires quite expensive systems. If you look at the missiles they're using, ballistic missiles of that range are expensive, they're complicated. You can't have them in the same numbers that you have artillery rockets with 100 kilometers range. So I think because of that, they're limited in the quantity, and Israel has shown itself to be quite capable of defending against these threats. Now, in regards to what the Houthis have, can they scale up attacks from what they've done already in terms of numbers? Perhaps a little bit. In terms of quality, I'm not sure. They've basically used everything that is in their arsenal and has that range against Israel already. So I'm not entirely certain whether we're going to see a really large qualitative change in their attacks.
The IDF says human error is to blame for failing to intercept Friday morning's deadly Houthi drone. How did a drone fired from Yemen successfully hit a building in Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast?
Well, there are still many questions that are not answered, but there are some indications that the version of the Samad 3 the Houthis have employed might have been an upgrade that had longer range. And of course, if you have longer range, you can do stuff like attack from unexpected angles that the Israelis might have not expected the Houthi drone to come from the Mediterranean to Tel Aviv. You can evade enemy defenses when you're the Houthis and you want to fire at Israel. Well, you have the Red Sea in between you, where you have the American warships. Then you have Saudi Arabia in between you and Israel, with Saudi air defenses that also have been getting better and have apparently, according to press reports, shot down some Houthi capabilities. So if you have additional range, you can try to avoid all of these obstacles and attack from an angle that no one really expected. So that might have contributed to that one lucky Houthi shot we've seen.
The Houthis claim increased cooperation with other Iranian proxies, namely the Iraqi Resistance Front. In your eyes, have the lessons from Hezbollah's successful campaign of drone infiltration in northern Israel have been passed on to its other partners in the region?
So I think when you look at the whole so-called axis of resistance of Iranian-supported groups, Iranian proxies, you see that you have a permanent transfer of lessons learned and of modus operandi. So basically, you see how Iran's experience in the Iran-Iraq war was directly transferred to Hezbollah, leading to the buildup of the Hezbollah missile force. You see how other groups then copied the Hezbollah operations in 2006. So I think we're going to see a large proliferation of successful tactics. And one thing I would be worried about, for example, is that groups like Hezbollah would see how successful the Houthi maritime campaign has been, that you can use missiles that don't even hit that often, that are actually quite unreliable, to cause a lot of disruption to maritime traffic, because civilian shipping is very risk adverse. So I think there's a danger that these groups will learn from each other, definitely.
All right, Fabian Hines, research fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you very much for your insight this evening.
Thanks so much for having me.
And so with me here in studio, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Relek Shafir, former commander of the Tennof Air Force Base and former Israeli Air Force combat pilot. Relek, this attack that we saw by the Houthis on Friday surprised us Tel Avivians, but unfortunately it's the reality for northern Israelis now. For over 10 months, they've been getting hit by drone strikes from Hezbollah on a near daily basis for months now, as I mentioned. Should Tel Avivians be concerned that this is going to be their reality as well?
Well, in case Hezbollah get into the game, they can fire at will and hit Tel Aviv with larger missiles, but that would open up a full-scale war between Israel and Lebanon. And I'm stressing the word Lebanon, not Hezbollah, because Hezbollah are part of Lebanon. Lebanon's infrastructure is in the game as well, and that is why they're not going beyond a threshold of this tit-for-tat exchanges. Now, the Houthis are limited. The reason that it was easy for us to make a decision, I'm not just mentioning the actual strike, but to make a decision, is because they're very limited in what they can do other than sneak every now and then and create that kind of an attack on Tel Aviv. But as far as that is concerned, I would not worry about the Houthis. And let me also add that at the same time, there was a drone attack from the east that might have been coordinated between the either Syrians or Iraqi militias and the Houthis to actually put the spotlight on the east rather than the west. If that is so, then they were able to fool us.
How does this strike compare to Israel's strike on Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon in terms of the type of infrastructure that's targeted?
In southern Lebanon, Israel hits only military targets, Hezbollah targets. As this case may be, there are no civilians basically in southern Lebanon. Over 100,000 of them have left and evacuated the area. So anything that moves in that area is probably Hezbollah. So hitting Hezbollah, either operatives or infrastructure, weapons depot, not only in South Lebanon, but also in the Bekaa Valley, where the major part of the Shias reside, and this is their back office, so to speak. And so these are the only two targets that we hit. With the Houthis, we hit the actual port and oil depots and power stations to actually take out the light, take out traveling capabilities. Remember, the Houthis do not control all of Yemen, about 30 to 40%. And so without going into who the Houthis are and how they got there, this is a severe blow to the Houthis' capability to run shipping in that area that is different from what is happening in Lebanon or may happen in the future.
All right, Relic, stay with me. U.S. intelligence agencies are reportedly warning Russia could send advanced anti-ship missiles to Yemen's Houthis in retaliation for Washington's support for Ukraine. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing U.S. officials, Washington is working behind the scenes to stop the arms transfer. Meanwhile, Yana Suryadyanya takes a look at the growing relations between Moscow and Iran, as well as its proxy groups in the region.
В отношении сектора Газа могут быть предприняты меры военного и невоенного характера такого же плана, как и во время блокады Ленинграда в ходе Второй мировой войны. Это неприемлемо.
He essentially openly sided with Hamas.
אצלו כבר זהו, לבן שחור זה סדר עולם מחדש. הוא שובר אותו.
מאז פרוץ המלחמה בעזה, שבסך הכל עמדה מאוד משותפת של הציר הזה, הציר האנטי-ליברלי, אנטי-מערבי, אנטי-אמריקאי.
החודשים האחרונים מוכיחים שזה הולך ומתדרדר בצורה משמעותית, ואין ספק שממשלה ישראלית צריכה להתאים את המדיניות שלה בהתאמה.
ההסברים לכך שרוסיה מוצאת את עצמה באופן ברור יותר בצד של חמאס נעוצים באינטרסים רחבים הרבה יותר. רוסיה מהדקת את השותפות עם מה שמכונה ציר ההתנגדות, מתוך האינטרסים האזוריים, אך גם האנטי-מערביים. כעת המטרה היא להסיט את תשומת הלב של המערב מאוקראינה, לתת תמורה לאיראן על הסיוע במלחמה, ולעודד יצירת כאוס ומשבר חדש שבו ניתן להאשים את וושינגטון.
היא טעות כמוצאת שלל רב על כל אזור של בעירה, כי ככל שהוא ידלק יותר מהר, חלק ניכר מהלבה שיש באוקראינה יוסט למקומות אחרים.
Putin has concluded that because Israel is now in a very difficult situation, the cost of worsened relations with Israel is worth the benefits.
עד המלחמה באוקראינה, מערכת היחסים בין איראן ורוסיה הייתה מערכת יחסים בין שני צדדים או בין שני שחקנים שאינם שווים. כלומר, האיראנים נזקקו לרוסים הרבה יותר מאשר הרוסים נזקקו לאיראנים. מערכת היחסים הזאת הפכה להיות הרבה יותר שוויונית, והמציאות הזאת כמובן מנוצלת על ידי איראן.
מתורגמים היחסים האלה בפועל. עסקאות נשק מרובות ומשודרגות עם האיראנים, ייצור משותף של מל"טים בתוך רוסיה, שיתופי טכנולוגיות לשיפור מערך ההגנה, סיוע טכני עם לווייני ריגול איראנים וייתכן גם שיתופי ידע בתחום הגרעין. במקרה של חיזבאללה ורוסיה, קיים מערך דו-כיווני גובר בשבע השנים האחרונות לצורך עקיפת הסנקציות המערביות. הנשק הרוסי מוצא את עצמו בידי חיזבאללה עוד מימי מלחמת האזרחים בסוריה. כמו כן, לפי הערכות מתקיים שיתוף פעולה באימון הכוחות הרוסים הנלחמים באוקראינה בשימוש בכטב"מים איראנים בשטח סוריה. במקרה של חמאס, מדובר בשטח אפור. אין עדות לסיוע ישיר, אך לא מעט נשק סובייטי נמצא בשדה הקרב בעזה. חמאס עוסק לדבריו גם בייצור מקומי של נשק רוסי. הוול סטריט ג'ורנל גם מצביע על העברה של מיליונים לארגוני טרור בעזה דרך ערוץ הקריפטו הכי פופולרי ברוסיה, גרנטקס, העוקף ביעילות את הסנקציות האמריקאיות.
За что погибли дети маленькие, 7 лет, 4 и 10 месяцев. Я не знаю, как я переживу это.
З вересня місяця пішли там рекордні застосування. Ви знаєте, що навіть шахет 136, це теж небезпечна зброя.
Отношения между Россией и Ираном продолжают укрепляться. выходят на качественно новый уровень по всему спектру направлений.
יש הרבה מאוד דברים שאיראן הייתה שמחה לקבל מרוסיה. ידע בגרעין כמובן שזה נכון וזה אולי המטריד ביותר. רוסיה יכולה לעזור לאיראן לקצר את לוחות הזמנים, זה נכון גם על טכנולוגיה של טילים. רוסיה מתהדרת שהיא פיתחה טילים היפרסוניים, איראן כמובן הייתה שמחה מאוד שיהיו לה טילים היפרסוניים, ומערכות הגנה מפני טילים של ישראל לא נבנו ולא תוכננו. רוסיה יכולה לסייע לאיראן מודיעינית?
אם היית שואלת אותי את השאלה הזו לפני 5 או 10 שנים, אז הייתי אומר לך, רוסיה איננה מעוניינת שאיראן תהפוך להיות מדינה גרעינית. היום אני חושב שהמציאות השתנתה. בשקלול של הדברים שמשרתים את רוסיה או פוגעים ברוסיה, אני חושב שהם בהחלט יכולים לקחת גם את האופציה שאיראן תהפוך להיות מדינה גרעינית.
In recent months, the shipping network used more than a dozen tankers to export nearly 10 million barrels of crude oil, largely to Syria to support Assad.
ביחד במשך שנים רוסיה, איראן והפרוקסי שלה לא רק עוקפים את הסנקציות, אלא גם מממנים ומחמשים זה את זה.
לאיראן יש ידע מאוד מאוד גדול באיך עוקפים סנקציות, כי זה אצלה מאז שהיא נוסדה במתכונת החדשה ב-79 כמעט. לרוסיה יש בעצם את הקשרים ואת ההקשרים שלה. אני רואה את חיזבאללה עם רשת המבריחים שלו שיש לו בעולם בחלקים שונים, גם באירופה וגם בדרום אמריקה ועוד כהנה וכהנה, וגם כמובן במזרח התיכון. אני רואה אותו קבלן מבצעים של שתי המדינות הללו.
העדות הראשונה ליחסים הכלכליים האלה נחשפה ב-2018 בידי משרד האוצר האמריקאי. רשת שדרכה המשטר האיראני סיפק מיליוני חביות נפט למשטר אסד באמצעות חברות רוסיות ובראשן פרום סיריו אימפורט, הכפופה למשרד האנרגיה הרוסי. במקביל, כחלק מהרשת, הבנק המרכזי הסורי העביר מזומנים לארגוני חיזבאללה, חמאס ומשמרות המהפכה. דוגמה נוספת, טריה יותר, שאותה מדגיש המכון הבריטי-רוסי, היא החלטת איראן ורוסיה לחבר תקשורת בין בנקאית של המדינות כדי לאפשר העברות פיננסיות שעוקפות את מערכת סוויפט העולמית. למרות שלפי הערכות לא איראן ולא חיזבאללה ידעו על מועד מדויק של תחילת המתקפה באוקטובר, שניהם סיפקו במשך שנים את הסיוע לחמאס. ברוב המקרים מדובר בהברחות ולא במשלוחים רשמיים, אך ממצאים מצביעים על כך שב-7 באוקטובר חמאס עשה שימוש בנשק מתוצרת איראנית, סינית, רוסית וגם צפון קוריאנית.
יש כאן מחזור חיים לנשק הזה. חיזבאללה, כשמתיישן אצלו משהו, הוא מעביר את זה. הנשק הישן הזה מפנה את מקומו ובעצם יש כאן נשק יותר מתקדם שנשלח או מרוסיה או מאיראן לטובת החיזבאללה.
חמאס גם התמקד במשך שנים בייצור עצמי של תחמושת, לטענתו בסיוע הרוסים.
مصانع كلاشينكوف ورصاصته، رصاصة كلاشينكوف عم نصنعها بالإذن من الروس، عم نصنعها في غزة صرنا.
מאגרי הנשק של ארגוני הטרור בעזה כוללים גם נשק מתוצרת סובייטית מהמאה הקודמת, אך גם לא מעט נשקים חדישים יחסית, שאין לדעת אם סופקו בידיעתם של גורמים רשמיים.
Russia does not prohibit secondary arms sales, and therefore it is very easy for corrupt officials in other countries that when their country purchases Russian weaponry to somehow find their way into third or perhaps even fourth parties. And that is why the tracing process of figuring out how did these weapons specifically end up here is so difficult.
בין שאיראן ורוסיה ידעו על מתקפת חמאס המתקרבת מבעוד מועד או שלא, אפשר להניח שהיכולות הצבאיות שהציג הארגון לא היו קיימות, ללא הסיוע של שתי השותפות, שגם הרוויחו מהמתקפה והתקו את היחסים בעקבותיה.
Well, I think Putin has communicated indirectly through all of, again, the entirety of his responses post-October 7th, that no matter how hard he has attempted to cultivate good ties with Israel and balance that with good relations with Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, ultimately he's no friend of Israel.
We're going out for a quick break, but don't go anywhere. I-24 News will be back after a short commercial break.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us here on I-24 News. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has released a video statement a short while ago. Let's take a listen.
Citizens of Israel, since the beginning of the war, I've made it clear that Israel will impact anybody trying to harm it. So earlier today, I convened the Security and Defense Cabinet and asked them to support the decision I brought to attack the targets in Yemen. This is not a civilian port that we attacked. It was a place where they harbored lethal weapons that was provided to them from Iran, and they used it in order to attack Israel's international naval maritime path that is used by the entire world. I'd like to congratulate the IDF for a very precise and outstanding activity. It hit targets that are 1,800 kilometers from our borders, and it sends a message to our enemies that there is no place where Israel's long arm will not reach. This is the direct response to the drone attack in which an Israeli civilian was killed and other civilians were injured, and it also is a response to the aggression of the Houthis since the beginning of the war. Over the past 8 months, the Houthis have launched hundreds of cruise missile, ballistic missiles, and drones at Israel. All of these have been intercepted successfully by the Israeli defense system with the assistance of our good friend, the US, and the assistance of other countries, which I would like to thank. Just like Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis are an inseparable part of the Iranian axis of evil, which operates not just against Israel, but it threatens peace all over the world. And Israel expects the international community to increase its efforts against Iran and its proxies in order to stop Iranian aggression, in order to safeguard free maritime travel. Anybody who wants a safe and secure world needs to stand up to this axis of evil and support Israel's struggle against Iran and its proxies in Yemen, in Gaza, in Lebanon, everywhere. And before I finish, I have a message to the enemies of Israel. Do not be mistaken. We will protect ourselves in every way and in every front. Anybody who will harm us will pay a very heavy
Meanwhile,
price.
thousands of Israelis are protesting on the streets of Tel Aviv and other locations across the country this evening, urging Prime Minister Netanyahu to cancel his trip to the U.S. and instead seal the hostage release deal. Netanyahu is slated to take off for Washington on Sunday, where he will address a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. The premier was also expected to meet with President Biden, though the fate of that meeting is unclear as Biden has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Our correspondent Balir Sladin was at Hostage Square earlier this evening and filed this report.
So another Saturday evening, and the protest here at the Hostage Square, as we see behind me, tens or maybe hundreds of people already arriving here to the square in order to protest against the government and also demand a hostage deal as soon as possible to support the families of the hostages that, by the way, some of them at least today gave their weekly speech in front of the Kiryat, which is right beside the Hostage Square, calling on Netanyahu to accept the terms of Hamas and go for a deal in order to see their loved ones back in Israel. They're also saying that while we're talking today, next week Netanyahu is going to be in Washington. He's going to give his speech in the Congress, and some of them are thinking or planning to go to Washington in order to say that Netanyahu is the obstacle. He is the one that is preventing or jeopardizing the possibility of reaching a deal. They want to pressure the decision makers in Washington in order to pressure Netanyahu to accept the terms of the deal, especially after some reports saying that Netanyahu is prolonging the process intentionally in order to get something, as they're saying, from President Biden when he arrives to Washington, either in terms of normalization with Saudi Arabia or in terms of the ammunition that the administration is blocking in the U.S. to Israel. So this is happening at the Hostage Hostage Square, but this is not the only event here in the town. Also, organizations that are calling for an early election are going to protest today, as they are doing every single week. Thousands or maybe tens of thousands of people are expected to arrive to Tel Aviv in order to call for the resignation of the Prime Minister and call for an early election, because again they're saying that he is the one that's jeopardizing the deal, and the only solution is to go for an early election, change this government.
Still with me here in studio is Brigadier General in the Reserves, Relek Shafir, former commander of the Tel Aviv Air Force Base and former combat pilot for the Israeli Air Force. Relek, I want to get your take here. Understandable anger from those hostage families. I want to get your take. Do you think that Netanyahu should still, in fact, go to Washington and meet Biden and address Congress when there's a deal here to be finalized and sealed?
Well, there's really no conflict. I think we can all understand the worried families that feel that they might be left aside, and that is because the Prime Minister and his government are unable to show empathy towards the families of the victims and the hostages. But putting that aside, it's an important part, but putting that aside, going to Washington is an opportunity for Netanyahu on the international scene and on a national scene. We're talking about a game that we're seeing unfolding as Biden's stars are misaligned at this time, and the world is looking into a future that has probably Trump take the presidency, and that affects the Russians, it affects the Russians in Ukraine, the Russians' relationship with Iran, and the conjoining of interests between what's happening in Europe with the fact that maybe Biden, who supports Ukraine and stands behind Ukraine, maybe Trump won't be as friendly, being an isolationist, the Republicans being isolationists to begin with. So that changes the tectonic changes, and the connection to Israel and what is happening here is obvious because the Biden administration is here until January, and they may become more bold as they see him failing or flailing. They might be more bold to carry out all kinds of activities, both the Iranians and the Russians in Ukraine, towards that change. So this has to be looked in a much wider scale than the one we're looking at right now.
And briefly, Channel 12 is reporting that some of those relatives of hostages and hostages themselves will be traveling with the Prime Minister to the U.S., including Noah Al-Gamani, who was rescued from Gaza in that operation last month.
Just to mention that there are quite a few families who had been asked to travel with the Prime Minister and declined.
Correct.
So, and there are a lot of Israelis who are going over to the States to actually bring out their voice to the American people and to Congress.
All right, Relek, stay with me. The New York Times is reporting Joe Biden's advisors believe the president does not want to bow out of the November election before Netanyahu's trip to Washington this week, as Biden is allegedly unwilling to give Netanyahu the, quote, satisfaction. I-24 News' Robert Swift has the details.
United States and Israeli politics have a habit of bleeding into each other. And this may be happening once again as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to address a joint session of the US Congress on Wednesday, not for the first time. Speculation is growing that US President Joe Biden may end his campaign for re-election following pressure from senior Democrats. But he may be holding off on his withdrawal until after Netanyahu's visit to avoid giving his long-term frenemy the satisfaction, according to a report in the New York Times, citing several unnamed people close to Biden.
I don't walk as easy as I used to. I don't speak as smoothly as I used to. I don't debate as well as I used to.
Biden, who is isolating with COVID, is reportedly furious with senior party leaders, whom he believes are orchestrating a media campaign to dethrone him. His relationship with Netanyahu has deteriorated during Israel's offensive in Gaza.
It's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel.
Such tensions may have longer-term implications for support towards Israel from within the Democratic Party.
The White House National Security Council is reportedly considering sanctioning Israeli far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich over their hawkish positions and policies regarding the West Bank. According to Axios, citing 3 U.S. officials, the sanctions against the 2 hardline ministers were among the potential steps discussed at a meeting on Wednesday, centered on the deteriorating security situation in the West Bank and the Israeli government's decision to expand settlement housing and legalize 5 outposts. Additionally, those present in the discussion were reportedly unanimous in supporting overturning the Trump administration's policy of labeling products made in the West Bank settlements as made in Israel. Earlier this year, President Biden reportedly rejected that proposal on the basis that the U.S. should not sanction elected officials in a democratic country and opted instead to sanction Israeli settlers. And still with me here in studio, Brigadier General in the Reserves, Relik Shafir. Relik, I want to get your assessment here. What would be the implications if the U.S. were to, in fact, put sanctions on Ben-Gvir and Smotrich?
Well, it's more of a PR stint than anything else. Obviously, they wouldn't be able to use their banking account, things of that nature, because of the pressure put on the Israeli banks on those who are sanctioned. And they would be put in a blacklist, like such as terrorists, etc. It's a blow to the Israelis, but Netanyahu and the Israeli government is putting its money on Trump coming in January into the position of commander-in-chief. That might be a dangerous move because Trump, in his Abraham Accords, had been pushing for a Palestinian state, which is the main reason that Israel financed Hamas for many years in order to weaken the Palestinian Authority. So this would be putting money on a horse where you're not really sure where he's going at all. This is a precarious situation, and the pressure on the right actually may help Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a very smart politician. I'm throwing off as I say, a ball from left side, that Netanyahu would not be sorry if those sanctions were placed on Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, because he wants them off his back where they're threatening him all the time. And so he's not able to make decisions that are good for Israel. He's making decisions that are good for his government and its continued existence.
You mentioned those elections in the United States. If Biden were, in fact, to drop out of the race, how would that affect the United States' relationship with Israel?
Well, even if he does drop out of the race, he's still in office until around January 20th. He may...
potentially leaving, though, space for another Democratic candidate who might not have that same relationship with Israel.
Well, that Democrat would may not be affected or may not be consulted by Biden, who's still president until that time. And he may be free of making decisions that have to be carried on to the next term. And if he sees that he's going to lose, he might go loose, a loose cannon, and who knows, he'll take his revenge on Netanyahu, and unfortunately, we are behind that revenge.
It's certainly going to be a very interesting next few months with these elections in the United States, directly affecting the war here in Israel against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in the north. Adding to that, the Houthis also joining in on the party and creating this multi-front war we've been facing now for nearly 10 months. Relik Shafir, I want to thank you very much for joining us this evening. And with Donald Trump leading in the polls and President Biden's re-election chances looking increasingly slim, there is growing speculation over just how Trump would handle the issue of Israel in a second term. Correspondent Owen Alterman traveled to the U.S. to speak with former officials in the first Trump administration to get a sense of how they view that question and also whether they themselves would be willing to return to a Trump White House.
Take a look at what happened.
The event that shook the U.S. election campaign. Donald Trump, victim and political genius. In any event, Trump is leading in the polls. And in 110 days, he may walk onto the stage to give his victory speech. If so, Trump will return to the Oval Office where he made dramatic decisions that affect the lives of Israelis here in the Holy Land. If he wins, how will Trump treat Israel and the issues so close to Israelis' hearts? Will his policies on Israel continue? I-24 News went to meet those who worked with Trump within his administration to ask them what the future would look like with Trump as the 47th president of the United States.
He doesn't understand how alliances work. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't think in policy terms. He thinks in ad hoc, transactional terms. Seen through the prism, how does this benefit Donald Trump?
John Bolton's opinions don't come as a surprise.
To have that discussion with the president, and as I said, he was willing to provide it. It wasn't that we solved any of the issues.
His tone, on the other hand, is another story. The lion of the American right, the pro-Israel hawk. Bolton supported the Iraq War early in the century and fought against the nuclear deal with Iran as the years went by. Along the way, he took hawkish positions in every corner of the world. Under Trump, Bolton served as national security advisor for a year and a half, one of the most senior positions in the administration and one of the closest to the president within the hive. In the end, he was less than impressed with Trump.
I don't think he's fit to be president. I don't think he understands enough, certainly in the national security space, about what America's national interests are.
For Kenneth Marcus, the issue of Israel is also close to his heart.
In the United States, as in Israel, we might have different opinions. We are all one people.
In his role in the Department of Education under Trump, Marcus focused on anti-Israel protests on American college campuses years before they broke into the headlines.
To see what happened on October 7 was absolutely one of the most horrifying days of my life. But then to see how so many Americans, especially on college campuses, have responded to the atrocities, to the anti-Israel genocides, this has been absolutely worse.
His approach was and still is controversial, initiating lawsuits and counter-investigations against universities based on the situation on their campuses. If Trump calls on him again during a second term, Marcus could be interested.
I would say that there was probably a greater tolerance for boldness in policymaking during the Trump administration than in prior administrations, and that this came from the White House and had a lot to do with who the president was.
He's very smart, he's very direct, he's very frank, he listens to a lot of people, which is a good thing, right? People always criticize he listens to too many people. There's a lot of people with good ideas, and he synthesizes the information and makes the decision. He's not afraid to wear his heart on his sleeve. He's not afraid to say things that make people uncomfortable.
Jason Greenblatt may be a known quantity. During the Trump administration, he was given the Israeli-Palestinian dossier and was involved in brokering the Abraham Accords. Greenblatt came to the White House after having known Trump for 23 years as his lawyer, and Greenblatt is ready to back Trump up to a certain point.
He is the same guy that I always knew in every interaction that I had with him, and he's a guy that I respect, even if he speaks differently than I would want to speak or that I'd want to teach my kids to speak.
When Donald Trump rode the escalator down to the political playing field in 2015, he broke the rules within the Republican Party that had created a consensus more or less centered around a conservative agenda and, to some extent, a conservative temperament. 9 years later, the Republican elite has gotten accustomed to Trump. But tensions within the party remain. There's the question of Trump's temperament, along with the question of his loyalty to the conservative agenda. And does the ambition to represent the forgotten working class justify the changes Trump made in the party?
There is a part of the Israeli public that identifies emotionally with the MAGA movement and in the way that movement looks at the elite. What do you say to those voters?
Well, I'd say this. My father was a firefighter for the city of Baltimore. My mother was the housewife. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So I understand what blue-collar life in America is all about. And I'm telling you, Donald Trump is a threat to that way of life, not a supporter of it.
The average Israeli isn't interested in the infighting in the Republican Party between supporters of the free market and supporters of the working class. To the average Israeli, the story of Donald Trump is clear. Trump is good for the Jews. Will Trump's courage lead to brave decisions for Israel? Or will Trump's political instability lead to an abyss?
It seems to me that if you're evaluating the campaign of someone who has already served as president, you have to look at their record. President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, established a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, established the Abrahamic Accords, made great strides with respect to the Golan Heights and elsewhere. I don't think we've had any U.S. president who has been as good as President Donald Trump.
Only experience will prove this out one way or the other. I'll just say I was with him for 17 months and came away with the firm conclusion that he had no North Star other than what benefits Donald Trump.
So how could it be that a president with that record, many Israelis will say, is someone that they shouldn't want back in the White House, just down the road from where we're sitting?
Every one of those decisions can be justified for the political benefit that came to Donald Trump.
This is where the personal story of Trump, the fight within his political party, and the Israeli story meet face to face.
Sometimes he absorbed information from people that we thought were harmful. For example, President Abbas, who made it seem like this is before he cut us off, before the Jerusalem recognition by President Trump. President Abbas made it seem like, oh, it's all Israel's fault and we're ready to sign and we could do a really great deal. And President Abbas, despite what people think, carries himself as a statesman. So when he's sitting with President Trump and telling his story, he's a very good salesman, President Abbas. So it was also our job to explain the broader situation with the Palestinians.
He told me the story of when he met with Mahmoud Abbas. He came away convinced that Abbas really did want peace and that Bibi Netanyahu didn't.
That Bibi Netanyahu didn't want peace?
Not as much as Abbas. So that, you know, if it turns out that Trump is reelected, I'm not sure people in Israel should count on him being as favorable toward Israel as he was in the first term.
Bolton also revealed how Trump almost met with Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iran's then foreign minister.
And it's regrettable.
Late August of 2019, we attended the G7 summit in Biarritz, France. Trump called me up to his hotel suite, and along with Mick Mulvaney, then the chief of staff, and Jared Kushner, he said Macron had said he had Javad Zarif in a villa somewhere in Biarritz, and that he had invited Trump to meet with him.
What are you feeling and thinking at that moment?
That what I turned out to be the case, that I was on the verge of resigning. But Trump said, so what should we do? And I made the argument he should not meet with Javad Zarif for a lot of very good reasons. Mulvaney, to his credit, agreed, and Jared Kushner said, no, you should meet with him. Now, at the same time, Bibi Netanyahu was trying to get in touch with Trump, and Jared was intercepting the call.
Jared was stopping Netanyahu
That's
from
correct.
contacting Trump to tell Trump not to meet with the foreign minister of Iran.
That's correct. And Jared said, no, you should meet with him. Maybe you can make a deal.
Above all, on a personal level, to right-wingers, it's the classic dilemma. To influence from the inside or from the outside? To go into public service to put the stamp on the decisions themselves?
In the event that I were given an opportunity to have greater impact by serving in a presidential administration, well, I tend to say yes to public service opportunities, provided that they are ones in which I think that I can make a difference for the United States.
At some point, your own integrity has to tell you that you're not serving the country anymore, you're serving only your own ambition. And that's not a reason to be in the room.
Or is it more important to be independent and on the outside in order to speak truth to power and leave a mark on the public discourse? Donald Trump built a political brand around being unexpected. What will he say? What will he decide? What will he do? The unexpected marked John Bolton's way out. The unexpected was also what brought Kenneth Marcus in. The boldness, the guts to dare and achieve greatness. The Israeli public, according to polls, believes in Trump's unpredictability, believes that it will once again lead to good results. More with Marcus and Greenblatt, less with Bolton.
Here's a recap of our top story of the day. Israeli fighter jets carried out airstrikes in Yemen this evening. In a statement, the IDF confirmed it had struck Houthi regime targets in the port city of Hodeidah, which is used by the rebel group to receive weapons transfers from Iran. The military says the strikes are in response to the hundreds of attacks carried out against Israel in recent months, including Friday morning's deadly drone strike in Tel Aviv. The Houthis claim people were killed and injured in those Israeli airstrikes on fuel depots and are vowing revenge. The Iranian-backed proxy group says Israel will pay the price of escalation, warning its next target will be the port of Haifa. And that wraps this evening's edition here on I-24 News. Tune back in tomorrow at 5 p.m. Israel time for everything you need to know on the war here in Israel. I'm Sarah Martinez-Amir. Thanks for watching.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Bienvenidos a News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de i24 News. Yo soy Nicole Michel. A petición de nuestro querido público que nos ve desde Estados Unidos, América Latina, como en Europa y Medio Oriente, a continuación hemos preparado un programa muy especial, los Best of de News 24, las entrevistas y reportajes que más impactos le generó, porque hemos creado en español un periodismo de nivel desde Medio Oriente. La lucha contra el antisemitismo es fundamental. En una entrevista exclusiva para i24 News, el comisionario Fernando Lottenberg de la Organización de Estados Americanos dejó clara la postura de la organización hacia el mundo judío. Nos conseguimos con el prestigioso abogado y constitucionalista brasileño Fernando Lottenberg. Fernando, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros aquí en Tel Aviv en i24 News.
Un gusto y realmente un placer poder estar con vosotros.
Muchísimas gracias. Como sabemos, eres comisionario de la OEA para el monitoreo y el combate contra el antisemitismo, algo muy importante en estos tiempos de poder luchar contra la discriminación y el odio, más allá de lo que significa el combate al antisemitismo, ¿no?, en el judaísmo. Ha sido presidente de la Federación de Comunidades Judías de Brasil. Eres un gran defensor de la democracia y todos los derechos humanos. ¿Cómo hacer todas estas actividades? Y sabemos que viajas por distintas partes del mundo en unos momentos tan difíciles que ha vivido Israel a partir del 7 de octubre, pero algo muy importante también de recalcar. No es tan solo Israel, el mundo judío. Y tú que representas todo lo que tiene que ver con un continente, el continente latinoamericano, con una comunidad hispana que son 600 millones de personas.
Sí, bueno, estar acá después del 7 de octubre por la primera vez ya es una experiencia muy impactante, porque habemos escuchado, habemos leído, visto en la televisión y sigo i24 en las redes, pero cuando te vas a Niroz, cuando te vas al Festival Nova y hablas con la gente que estuvo ahí, es algo muy, muy distinto y que emociona mucho. Y nosotros estábamos viendo en nuestra parte del mundo cómo se incrementó el antisemitismo a partir del 7 de octubre. Hubo una pequeña ola de buena voluntad, de comprensión, pero luego se pasó y vimos la gente hablando las cosas como comparando a los nazis o hablando de genocidio y usando términos que no imaginábamos que sería posible. Así que creo que esta función, como la de los otros colegas que tenemos, demuestra que países, gobiernos, instituciones multilaterales están preocupadas porque el antisemitismo es algo que empieza con los judíos, pero no termina con los judíos. Y es algo que puede ser un instrumento que va al final derrotar tanto la democracia como los derechos humanos.
¿Cuál es el compromiso ahora, Fernando, que tiene la Organización de Estados Americanos, su secretario general, Luis Almagro, que ha sido un gran defensor de los derechos humanos en distintas partes de Latinoamérica y en general de lo que significa la importancia de la lucha contra el odio y la discriminación? ¿Cuál es ahora el enfoque que ha dado la Organización de Estados Americanos con respecto a Israel y al mundo judío?
Bueno, sabes que la Secretaría General de la OEA ya adoptó la definición de antisemitismo de la IRA y es parte de mi mandato expandir esa adopción por otros países. Hoy tenemos en las Américas 7 países que ya la adoptan y en mi mandato 3 se agregaron, que son Colombia, Guatemala y Panamá. Esta es una lucha permanente, tiene la comprensión del secretario general y el incentivo, y él ha publicado ya desde el comienzo, después del 7 de octubre, una condena muy fuerte de que pasó y ahora sobre el ataque de Irán. Así que creo que la posición es muy coherente y clara por parte de la organización.
Exacto. Lo hemos visto, estuvieron aquí los gobernadores de Goiás y de Sao Paulo, que ellos también se adhirieron a esta definición y es importante eso impulsarlo, ¿no? Sabemos que tú, Fernando, eres un impulsor de todo lo que es la educación y los tratados internacionales dentro de la Organización de Estados Americanos. Me gustaría saber ahora cómo lo estás enfocando y algo muy importante. ¿Han trabajado ustedes el tema de los medios de comunicación? Sí. Porque no es tan solo la educación con respecto a los institutos en toda Latinoamérica y los tratados, sino los medios de comunicación.
Claro que sí. Es ahí donde se libra la batalla más importante. Medios de comunicación tradicionales y los nuevos medios que se llaman redes sociales. Es un reto que nosotros estamos enviados especiales de todo el mundo con un subgrupo dentro de nuestro comité para enfrentar esta cuestión. Tenemos en las Américas convenciones importantes, como has mencionado, tratados contra el racismo, contra la discriminación, y incentivamos que más países las adopten y las transformen en leyes internas, porque nosotros vemos la cosa en dos caminos. El primer, de la educación. La gente tiene que saber quién son los judíos, qué pasaron, cuál es su historia, qué pasó en el Holocausto, para que no lo nieguen, para que no lo distorsionen, y hay instrumentos para eso. Brasil, por ejemplo, cuando yo estaba en la Federación de Comunidades Judías, hizo la inclusión en su currículo nacional de la enseñanza del Holocausto. Otros países deben hacerlo también. Y especialmente medios de comunicación y redes sociales, el desafío de la regulamentación es algo que está muy presente. Porque vea, una emisora como I-24 tiene sus reglas, sabes lo que se puede decir, lo que no se puede decir, porque hay leyes que las regulan. Tiene responsabilidad usted como periodista, el editor, el dueño, y en las redes esto no pasa así. Parece que es algo como un territorio libre donde el odio se puede proliferar, donde la discriminación no tiene límites, y estamos muy empeñados en hacer con que esto cambie. Puede ser algo que tiene que ver con autorregulación, que las redes mismas tengan que poner límites, y el otro, la regulación pública, sea por leyes, sea por decisiones judiciales.
Exactamente. Bueno, el compromiso con los medios y la televisión es un medio que hay que buscar en acercarse y mantenerlo, independientemente que están las redes sociales. Cierto que incluso la Organización de Estados Americanos congrega a todos los países locales, con excepción de Cuba, ¿no? Aparte de eso, España también ha adoptado una legislación contra la lucha contra el antisemitismo. ¿Cómo es esa lucha en una diversa América Latina?
Bueno, sabes que tenemos...
Y el mundo hispano.
Sí, tenemos América Latina, tenemos Américas en general, porque Estados Unidos y Canadá también son parte de la OEA. Sí. Y claro, hay que hacer las cosas distintas por cada estado. La OEA no es una organización que está por arriba de los estados. En verdad, los estados son parte de la OEA y tienen representantes generales permanentes que conducen la organización. La secretaría, el comisionado, son instrumentos de su acción. Así que hay que poner, con las convenciones podemos tener algo que sea general, y en cada país buscar legislación específica que pueda atender a la conformación legal local. Por ejemplo, Estados Unidos tiene el tema de la primera enmienda. Claro. Así que es muy difícil poner límites a lo que sea alguna restricción que en otros países como Brasil, Argentina o España sí es posible. Así que estamos luchando para que donde se pueda se sepa que no hay derechos absolutos. Claro. Nosotros estamos muy a favor de la libertad de expresión, y vos conocés por su experiencia en Venezuela cómo este es un bien precioso y por veces raro en nuestra región. Nosotros todos ya sufrimos lo que son dictaduras, lo que son restricciones. Así que no es esto que queremos, pero queremos que la libertad de expresión conviva con otros principios, no con el racismo, no con la discriminación, pero que una cosa se limite a la otra.
Bueno, justamente sacabas el tema de Venezuela, de donde yo soy origen, además de ser israelí. Hay un antisionismo específico en la izquierda en América Latina. Hay diferentes formas de antisemitismo en América Latina. Hay un fundamentalismo islámico que no concierne al continente, y lo hemos visto reflejado en la penetración de Irán en América Latina, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, que son países que le han dado la apertura. Por supuesto, eso preocupará a la región, preocupa a Estados Unidos, Canadá. ¿Cómo crees tú que se puede, y en un momento en los que Israel tuvo ese ataque tan fuerte y por primera vez desde 1948 en la creación de su Estado, ¿Cuál es la preocupación que tiene la región con respecto a esa penetración de Irán en América Latina?
Sí, es muy seria, la llevamos muy en serio, porque tuvimos, entre otros, los ataques en Amia, en la embajada israelí en Buenos Aires, que después de 30 años la justicia finalmente confirmó lo que todos ya conocíamos, que Irán lo formuló y Hezbollah lo ejecutó. Así que tenemos, el antisemitismo puede ser extrema derecha, de extrema izquierda, del fundamentalismo islámico, es como un triángulo y hay que combatirlos a todos procurando entender de dónde vienen. Por ejemplo, si en Charlottesville viene uno que dice Jews will not replace us en la marcha que hicieron, o después en Pittsburgh porque creen que los judíos ayudan a los refugiados a sustituir la población blanca de los Estados Unidos. Este es algo de derecha. En la izquierda es algo que tiene más que ver con Israel y yo personalmente te digo, Nicole, que tengo un poco de restricción al termo antisionismo. Yo prefiero, como otros colegas, el antisemitismo relacionado con el Estado de Israel, porque el sionismo está ahí. Ya es algo que el objetivo del sionismo era construir un Estado en la tierra ancestral del pueblo judío. Está bien, ya estamos aquí y el Israel les dice cómo se reencuentra de la Revolución Francesa. No tiene muy sentido. Pero la cosa que en el Estado de los judíos, en el Estado donde vive casi la mitad de la población judía mundial, se ve la misma ola, los antiguos tropos reciclados que matan a niños, que están en el control, que es todo tipo de teoría de conspiración que antes era aplicado a los judíos y después del Holocausto ya ser antisemita no es algo aceptable, ahora se torna contra el Estado de Israel.
Muy corto ya, los pogroms en noviembre de 1938 sucedieron, los ataques el 7 de octubre de 2023. Han pasado ya 85 años. Fernando, ¿cuál es el compromiso ahora para la lucha contra el antisemitismo?
El compromiso es de seguir luchando firmemente contra todo tipo de discriminación, contra el discurso de odio y contra los ataques violentos a los judíos, sea en Israel, sea en fuera de Israel. El antisemitismo, como yo he dicho antes, es algo que se manifiesta contra los judíos, pero tiene como algo la convivencia democrática. Es algo, una teoría de la conspiración que imagina que hay gente que está en el control, que tiene más poder que los otros, que tiene más recursos que los otros y no puede ser así. Tenemos que estar juntos. La mejor manera de defender a las minorías es defender la democracia, es defender a los derechos humanos y para eso estamos.
Fernando, muchísimas gracias por haber estado con nosotros en I-24 News.
Beit el Farasha es un lugar de encuentro gastronómico en la ciudad de Acco, donde judías y musulmanas comparten y la magia de la coexistencia tiene sabores orientales.
Hola, shalom, salam aleikum. Nos conseguimos en la ciudad antigua de Acco, ante un edificio de la época de los romanos, en Beit el Farasha, un lugar de encuentro entre musulmanas y judías. Las fotos que se encuentran alrededor son los vecinos de esta casa, de Beit el Farasha. Vamos a conseguirnos con Katie para saber cómo se vive en este lugar. Hello. Welcome to Beit el Farasha. Thank you. Gracias. Vamos a pasar. Acompáñenme. Cuéntame, ¿por qué has creado Beit Farasha? ¿Cuál es el concepto? ¿Cómo ha sido el inicio de este maravilloso proyecto?
Muchas gracias por venir a conocer Beit el Farasha. Creemos que mucha gente que viene a Acco a pasar unos días y van a hoteles o restaurantes se pierden la oportunidad de poder encontrarse con la gente del lugar. Para que puedan conocernos, abrimos una cocina en Beit el Farasha, que en árabe quiere decir la cocina de la mariposa. Y queremos que la gente que se allegue a esta casa tenga una experiencia conjunta para conocerse, que todos somos iguales, que tan solo hay que conocer mejor uno al otro. Este es el espacio ideal para que eso ocurra.
Ahora entramos a las cocinas de Beit Farasha. Acompáñenme con la directora de este maravilloso lugar, esta cocina que se llama Hadija. Acompáñenme.
Nos disponemos a preparar cubineya.
Tenemos aquí varios condimentos. Tenemos aceite de oliva, nana y ají picante y cúrcuma. Hacemos una masa y mezclamos todo. Esta es salsa de granadas y hay que poner muy poquito. El que quiera puede después agregar más.
Yoter. A ver.
Hadija nos invita a degustar este plato vegetariano al que rozamos un poco de limón para darle más atrevimiento al paladar.
Hadija, yo quería saber un poco de dónde eres, Beifoad. ¿Naciste aquí en Aco?
Yo nací en Aco, me llamo Hadija Abdani. Tengo 3 hijos, 2 niñas y un niño. Soy la cocinera profesional de Bet El Farasha.
Hadija, ¿cómo es la vida entre árabes y judíos?
Este lugar lo que nos permite es conocernos y amarnos. Las delicias que cocinamos les salen desde lo más profundo del corazón. Y yo les devuelvo mi amor a todos haciendo recetas únicas del estilo Aco y sentimos que somos una familia.
Y ahora es fija.
Hoy haremos pan de pita, el estilo Aco, que se hace con agua que contiene azafrán. Agua que preparamos ayer por la noche y la usamos para preparar el pan. Para lograr este color, pusimos el azafrán en el agua y mezclamos con la harina. Tenemos yogurt, miel y carne fresca. Tenemos la carne, a la que le agregamos cebolla y perejil. La salsa tiene pimienta y la mezclamos con la carne. Tenemos pimienta roja, pimienta negra y comino. Con toda esta mezcla hacemos un condimento. Abrimos el pan de pita, que como verán tiene color amarillo por el azafrán.
Es ella.
Tomamos un poco de carne y los esparcimos cubriendo todo el pan y luego lo pasamos por el aceite de oliva. Al horno va por unos 10 a 15 minutos y tendrán un plato delicioso.
Anat, ¿qué? Tu familia es de Bulgaria, Abba, tu papá. El papá de Anat es de Bulgaria, o sea, son sefardí. Español, habla español, ladino, ¿no?
Ladino.
Ay, qué maravilla, qué bonito. ¡Wow! Tiene 82 años su papá. Oh, ¡qué belleza!
¡Qué belleza!
¡Qué belleza!
Pincelamos en aceite de oliva las esfillas para llevarlas al horno.
Muy bien. 10 minutos.
La cocina es un lugar universal. Conecta culturas y personas, risas, una misma pasión, la buena gastronomía, la energía positiva entre judías y musulmanas en Aco. Anat, la israelí, me confesó.
Me encanta latinos.
¡Latinos!
Queremos tridi. Es una mezcla de hummus, galletas, crispy y yogur al que le agregamos limón y tajina, sal, limón, nana y cúrcuma. Y agregamos un poco de comino.
Y ahora almendras tostadas.
El arte culinario de Aco tiene una importante influencia libanesa, siria y productos agrícolas de las colinas de la región. Quizá la paz en Medio Oriente la podamos lograr a través de la gastronomía, con olores orientales de cúrcuma, nana, azafrán, trabajándola juntas, con las manos, extensiones del corazón.
Y en este lugar tan maravilloso de convivencia entre árabes y judías, nos despedimos en Beit El Farasha con una cocina deliciosa. ¿Y cómo le decimos a todos? ¡Adiós! I24 News estuvo presente en la visita realizada por los gobernadores brasileños de Sao Paulo y Goiás. En la ciudad de Renana, a unos 15 kilómetros de Tel Aviv, se reunieron con la comunidad brasileña en Israel. Veamos el siguiente reportaje.
En la ciudad de Renana, a 15 kilómetros de Tel Aviv, en su teatro municipal Yad Levanim, la comunidad brasileña, junto a los anfitriones de la ciudad, el alcalde Haim Broide y el filántropo brasileño-israelí Moti Sonnenfeld, recibieron a los gobernadores de Sao Paulo, Tarcisio de Freitas, y de Goiás, Ronaldo Callado, quienes han visitado Israel con la organización de Conexión Israel, un viaje de encuentro con la tragedia vivida en tierras hebreas. Cada uno de los importantes presentes nos dieron sus impresiones que conecta Israel y Brasil.
ברעננה יש את הקהילה הכי גדולה של עולים מברזיל, וכאשר אני כראש העיר מקבל כאן שני מושלים שתומכים בישראל, אנחנו עושים את הכל לחבק אותם ולהגיד להם תודה. אנחנו זקוקים לתמיכה הזאת היום כשהאנטישמיות בעולם עולה.
A visita de dois governadores dos dois estados mais pujantes da nossa nação aqui em Israel alivia para nós, como brasileiros, a fala malfadada do presidente da nossa república que não representou a nação na sua fala.
Eu acho fundamental o apoio desses políticos. Eles vieram aqui de coração, eles vieram aqui mostrando carinho pelo povo de Israel, eles vieram aqui para ver a verdade.
Na verdade, esses dois governadores vieram ver de perto qual é de verdade o estado do povo de Israel, o que ele de verdade faz. Eles vêm trazer um pouco de luz no meio de muita escuridão. Então eles visitaram todos os kibbutzim lá do sul do país, onde lá houve os ataques terroristas do Hamas, desses desumanos. E eu acho que a visita deles para cá pode trazer um pouco de luz para o mundo inteiro. Em primeiro lugar para o Brasil, que tem muitas informações, desinformações, coisas erradas que falam lá em relação ao nosso país, ao nosso povo, o povo de Israel. Então, com essas informações, com essa visita que eles vieram para cá, eles estão vendo o que de fato aconteceu, eles vão conseguir influenciar as pessoas que estão perto deles para entender melhor um pouco do que é o povo de Israel, o exército de Israel, que é o exército mais ético do mundo, e tudo que eles fazem é para nos defender desses terroristas que nos querem atacar.
Nosotros en Israel amamos a Brasil, nosotros sabemos que Brasil también ama a Israel y esas relaciones no pueden desaparecer ahora, que decir, desde la creación del Estado de Israel, con ayuda de Osvaldo Aranha, tenemos esas relaciones tan cercanas y ellos tienen que seguir y seguir mejorando.
I made this book in Portuguese because I have many followers from Brazil that love Israel, they love the Israeli food, they love the Israeli lifestyle.
El himno de Brasil, compuesto por Francisco Manuel da Silva, el aplauso, la guitarra, el discurso y las emociones. El recuerdo a Naamá Levi, secuestrada, hija de la ciudad de Renana. Los gobernadores y sus palabras de apoyo.
Naquele momento, brasileiro, aí sim homem que tinha postura de estadista, Osvaldo Aranha, presidindo a sessão na ONU, com a visão de homem solidário, humanitário, digno do cargo que ocupava, soube numa votação histórica na ONU reconhecer por 33 votos a 13 a vitória do Estado de Israel e do Estado da Palestina. A construção de um povo que, sem dúvida alguma, soube superar dificuldades. De mais de 10 mil palestinos haviam sido tratados nos hospitais. E eu fico imaginando, porque como médico que sou, nada é mais gratificante na vida do que o gesto de cidadão que foi operado. Às vezes a gente não se lembra dele, mas ele não nos esquece. E ele sempre dirige uma palavra, graças a Deus.
Nós temos que dar suporte para vocês. Nem que seja, às vezes, a simples palavra. Estamos juntos, estamos aqui, não vamos deixar vocês sozinhos. E a gente fica pensando, meu Deus, por que tanta perseguição? Imagine que o povo que foi escravo no Egito, que sofreu com babilônicos, que sofreu na mão dos romanos, que sofreu os horrores do Holocausto, e a gente imagina que nada de ruim vai acontecer depois de uma tragédia tão violenta, de algo tão agressivo. Esse povo é barbaramente atacado no dia 7 de outubro. E por quê? Por que razão? Se enganam quem pensa que aquela turma, aqueles terroristas do Hamas, querem um Estado palestino. Não querem. Está claro que eles querem a destruição de Israel. E esse é só o começo.
Obrigado, gobernadores. Hasta aquí nuestro programa de hoy a través